Welcome to Journey Through the Gate, your paranormal portal podcast, as we delve into the many questions and wonders brought on by the supernatural experience. What's on the other side of the gate? Let's find out together. Good evening, and welcome to this side of the gate. And tonight, we are walking through the gate again with Mr. Steve Stockton, and we are going to do Monsters Part 2. So we're going to walk through the gate and see what we can find tonight. You ready, Steve?
Yeah, I'm ready to go. So let's go. And had such a good time doing Part 1 that
I will tell you there is a lot more monsters out there than I thought. When we started digging, I guarantee you Steve has got a whole basket full of monsters to pull out, some of which you might have heard of, and I know I haven't heard of many of them. And some old favorites that we're going to bring up too. Last time we started talking about some of the old Universal Pictures monsters, like who doesn't remember those? You know, your Wolfman, you know, your Boris Karloff, your Lon Chaney, your Vincent Price stuff that, you know, they were just fantastic. You know, you remember seeing those as a kid, right? Who didn't love those?
And the thing about a lot of those, there were some of the legends that were based in what was considered fact. I mean, you had vampires in Eastern Europe, you had sightings of wolfmen, you know, going back centuries and things. So it wasn't just somebody somewhere, you know, making up stuff and making movie scripts, although it was sensationalizing things. But a lot of that is based in some nugget of truth there, or some, you know, true happening or something that really did possibly exist.
Right. And I know since we've been digging in Monsters Part 1, we had brought up the whole part about Wolfman and how back in the day it was Wolfman, and now I really think Dogman. I mean, I don't know when the switch happened. I don't know if it's the same thing.
Well, I think it's kind of a downgrade, you know, because if you look at a wolf and a dog, the wolf's bigger and stronger and more ferocious, whereas a lot of the dogmen sightings, they're not quite on a scale that you could equate it to a wolf, but more like a dog that's taken on human characteristics, where that's some sort of man-canine hybrid. So I think that's where the distinction lies. But like I said, I'm not really sure where the dogman became more prevalent.
Right.
You hear a lot about those now, in particularly in the Midwest, Ohio, places like that, Michigan. There's lots of dogman sightings.
There just seems to be an awful lot of those lately, like I said, and you're not hearing as much about the Wolfman sightings, but then again, they are underground. During Halloween, you're going to be back on. We're going to do our spooktacular Halloween special. And during that month, it's basically going to be a season. You know, we're going to do all of September, all of October, just Halloween, just, you know, full tilt boogie. And we've got...
There's a whole build-up, and then it's just one day.
I know, We're going to do a season of Halloween here.
Yeah.
And I'm excited for it. I'm already starting to get people in, and I know we're going to have Linda Godfrey on, and we're going to really talk an awful lot about the Dogman Wolfman thing, because so many accounts that you just will not. I'm just flabbergasted at how many accounts of the old-fashioned Wolfman is still going on. So that's going to be exciting. But I had one that I forgot to say on the first one. So as a continuation from Monsters 1, the best... Now, I've been hearing a lot lately, like I said, but still one of the best accounts of the Wolfman I've ever heard in modern times was basically on, I want to say it was A Haunting, but it could have been one of the other shows where they reenact. But the gentleman, what happened to him was he had moved into a house with his wife, and they didn't have any kids. So he's got a job, and now she's out in the rural middle of nowhere woods, and he's going to work. So she's alone all day, and I forget what she did. I think she was a seamstress. She sewed. I could be wrong about that. But she was basically home a lot alone. And I know from experience, when you're in a house like that, and you're surrounded by woods, and you're not used to it, it can get pretty creepy when you're alone at night, because you just stare out into those woods, and you just know there's stuff looking back at you.
Even in the daytime, just like
Yes.
I grew up way out in the country, and if my parents were gone and I was there by myself, you hear stuff. You hear stuff in the woods. You hear the house settling was what they'd always say, but
Oh, yeah.
floorboard creaks or a couple footsteps in the leaves, and you can't see anything. It gets your attention.
Well, what happened starting to happen to her is daytime and nighttime, mostly nighttime though. And it didn't happen all the time, but it would happen in like a succession of like 2 days, and then it wouldn't happen for a while, and then it'd be another couple 2 days, a couple weeks later. These accounts would happen. She'd be looking out the window doing dishes, and that old thing where you got the sink right in the window would be right above where your sink is. So when you're doing dishes, you're looking out the window. She sees something dart across the lawn. Well, first, she went through all the steps. She'd think, okay, well, was that a bear? Bear running on its back legs across the front, the backyard. She'd go out and look, nothing. The next thing you know, she's in the living room, and there's something hairy with like a wolf face looking in her front window. Now, that's darn scary, but you think about it, you're in a house, and really the only thing you have between you and whatever's trying to get you is the walls, and how strong are those, and glass, which is spooky when you start to realize it's on the other side of glass breaks. So she would, all these different things started happening. Of course, her husband would come home, she'd explain it. You're letting your mind wander, blah, blah, blah. You're making too much out of it. You saw something else. This took a while of buildup between this couple till finally she said she saw something. He went out there and looked, and there's tracks going back out from the window to the woods. So natural progression of things. He grabs his shotgun and he follows the tracks. His friend happened to come over. A big pickup pulls in the driveway. Here we go. He's got guns in his truck, and he goes, "What are you doing? You going hunting?" "No." "Well, kind of. Look at these tracks." Now, the tracks look like bipedal, of course, wolf, but standing on his back feet, kind of feet. They're bigger than the guy's foot, and they follow the tracks. Now, they go through the woods. I guess it rained. I think it was snow, though. I think the snow had melted and the ground was pretty muddy. They were able to track this thing to an old shed that was outside of a house. Now, the one guy wanted to just go in that shed, and the other guy's holding him back, going, "We can't just go break into this thing." So it elongated the story even more. They start going in town trying to figure out who lives in this shed, the house where the shed was. And doing a little investigation, they find out it's a guy that works in the local auto. Now, this is a little town, so it's like a gas station auto repair off the back of an old gas station, a old country gas station. Now, the other guy's getting a little nervous. Okay, we've asked some questions. We don't want to raise any suspicion. I'll just go get a tire and get it fixed. Well, he goes and gets a tire, brings it into the guy, and the owner of the shop calls the guy from the back, and the guy's sitting there trying to get a look at this guy who lives in this house, and they met eyes, and the guy just gave him a look like one of those "I know you know" looks, and his eyes were like a yellow kind of looking thing, and it was just hideous. The way the guy said the guy looked at him, I mean, he said he could have melted right there in his boots. It scared him to death. And this was a big guy, and he didn't feel good about saying he was scared, but he had to admit he was scared. So the guy grabs the tire and rolls it back where nobody can see him, and they're still trying to have this conversation with the owner of the store. "Hi, Mulder." "Hey, Mulder." And the owner of the store, and the guy is staying back away so they can't see him. And when he's done with the tire, now this is one of the creepy parts, when he's done with the tire, the guy says, "All done," and he doesn't come out and bring the tire. He just rolls it out of the garage on its side so he didn't have to come around again. And that was creepy. And the guys went and picked up the tire, threw it in the back of the pickup. And then the one other guy told him, "Look, we got to go find out what's going on." And they went back to the shed, and they could hear all this commotion going on inside. And it's almost like it was a wild dog up in the thing. And the other guy got scared. He said, "I'm getting out of here. We're going to get trespassing or breaking and entering or something. I'm not going in there. The guy wanted him to go in there and shoot what was ever in there. He says, you don't know what's in there. Well, the wife is still seeing things. It starts to escalate, even more. She's seeing more outside her windows, and it all boils down to the guy just told his friend, leave it alone. About 2 weeks later, they're in the diner drinking coffee, and the guy who owns the gas station is in there, and he hears him talking to the waitress that the guy had died that lived there, that worked at his station. They know one of the police officers, one of the deputies in this small county, and they went up to ask the guy, did you know anything about what happened at the house? Anything odd go on? And he goes, come here, you're not going to believe this. And he takes him up to the shed and shows him. And inside of that shed, in the back end of it, was one of those rooms that had like the big double kind of door. It locked from the inside, and inside there was a pole with the chains, and there was scratches all over the inside of this hidden room. Now you tell me what was going on. You see what I'm saying? The yellow eyes.
Pause for thought. Yeah.
I know. And now after he was gone, now the police or whoever owned that property afterwards, he said basically that he hadn't left it to anybody. He had no family, and the county was moving to destroy the property. The property was pretty condemned anyway. Like the house was a shambles, And within a month, they had absolutely demolished that shed and the house. And the guy said it was one of the weirdest things he had ever witnessed. So that wasn't too long ago. That was within the past 10 years. So how about that?
Mm-hmm.
So do wolfmen really exist? Is there a thing where men can turn into it? I don't know. I just don't know enough to say it's impossible.
It makes you wonder, and just throughout history, I mean, they're not even sure exactly where the legend or the lore came from. I mean, some people point to the epic of Gilgamesh, which is one of the oldest known Western prose, and she had her lover had turned her previous mate into a wolf. So you got that, and in Greek mythology, Zeus turned a guy and his son into wolves as punishment. I'm just going off the top of my head here. The Nordic folklore.
Yeah.
There's a story about a father and son duo that donned wolf pelts and transformed into animals and went on a rampage, and kill things in the woods. And then even 15th, 16th century, in France, the werewolf legends of that time are very, very gory and very popular. Mm-hmm. There was a couple of men that were caught that claimed that they had sworn allegiance to the devil and had some sort of ointment or salve or something that they could smear on themselves and then change into wolves. And they got burned at the stake for their little confession there. So it's even, into modern times in 1800s forward, there's still remnants of that, almost the same story. I'm not sure where the movie part about it only being able to turn into a werewolf during the full moon, but there is some things to the full moon. If you've ever known anybody that was a cop or a nurse, they will tell you that people are wilder and more things occur when there's a full moon. Hospitals are busier. There's more police activity. Just it does something to people.
And that's for sure. And how do you say it? Lycanthropy? How do you say it?
Yeah, that's how I would say it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's all in so many different traditions as well, all over the world. So where does that come from? And even if you bring in like Skinwalker Ranch or any of those things, I mean, many of the things that they've seen there were basically a large wolfman, dogman thing. I mean, they saw many things there and in several other places as well. So I want to be on the fence, on this side of the fence and go, nah, nothing like that could ever happen. But now digging into it for a while, I'm thinking, I got to sit on the fence and go, I don't know. I just don't know enough about it to say, there's no way.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, even if you want to bring skinwalkers into it, like I said, the Wendigo and the skinwalkers last time, that's absolutely. And of course, a lot of times they change into that. That's, that's the whole people that have sightings and things like that and tell stories, legends passed down. That's what they turn into. So it could all be one thing. It could be many different things. But again, I'm on the fence, man. I don't know. That's just creepy.
Yeah, at this point, with all the things I've personally seen, and then all the stories I've heard and whatnot, I don't discount anything.
Yeah.
You try to keep a skeptical mind, but it's just like, I'm not going to say no, that can't happen, because who knows?
Yes, exactly. That's how I feel.
There's all kinds of things that happen that aren't supposed to happen.
Right. Now, out of the other, I always say Universal movie stuff, because I can remember having a babysitter when I was real young, and she had an older son, and his hobby was the old, was it 38 projector, the where they'd play the movies, and you could get the movies, and they'd be on a little reel, and you had to feed it through
8mm
movie
projector.
Yeah. And he would play the movies, and it would either be Frankenstein, it would be Frankenstein and the Wolfman, it would be the Mummy, it would be the Invisible Man, just different ones like that, and it was just Godzilla. So you and I were talking, and I brought up Frankenstein, and you found out some interesting stuff about Frankenstein.
Yeah, like you were saying there, same thing. I mean, the 8mm film, that was the video of its day. Everybody had the 8mm film camera. My dad took home movies, and then certain nights we would hang a sheet on the wall. He'd get the projector out, show it on the sheet, and just like you were talking about there, out of the back of a comic book, I ordered these little 8mm reels, and you'd think you were getting the whole movie, but it was just like a 3-4 minute clip. Same thing. I had the Universal monsters. I had Dracula and the Wolfman and Frankenstein, and then some other stuff. But yeah, Frankenstein, that's one of those that was written in 1817. But I was doing some research, and this is when I lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. There was a doctor named Dr. Stephen Foster, no relation to other Stephen Fosters that you've heard of, the songwriter. But he was doing experiments probably around the 1820s, 1825, not too long after that book came out. He had studied the works of Galvani, which he discovered the effect that electricity had on muscles, where you might have done this in school, where you had the frog leg and you apply current to it and the leg flexes. So he probably, I'm guessing, had read Frankenstein because it was popular at the time, and he decided to actually give it a go. And at one point there in Knoxville area, it's now known as Summit Hill. Back then it was known as Gallows Hill. They had a double hanging there. And not only was he a doctor, he was also a preacher at the First Presbyterian Church, which is the oldest in Knoxville, got the oldest graveyard. The doctor's actually buried there. You can go visit his grave. But he got the corpses of these two young guys that had been hanging. I think they were in their 20s, or at least one of them was. He picked the best one, and a crowd of people followed him. They knew what he was up to. They followed him back to the church, which was also where he performed his experiments. Wow. But instead of letting them in, he bolted the doors and everything. But there were people that stood on other people's shoulders and peered in the windows, and he actually took one of the bodies and had some kind of current that he was generating with batteries, which if you've ever seen the old batteries that people used before regular electricity, they're about the size of a small fish tank. And then you had a series. That's where the term battery comes from, because you had a whole bunch of them. And he applied current to this body, and he actually got it to draw, I think it was 2 or 3 breaths, and a little bit of movement, and it kind of moaned. Oh. But then he decided at that point, he kind of had a change of heart or something. I think that he felt like he would be cheating the law or the government if he brought a condemned man back to life, because that was apparently a thing back then, that if something went wrong and you beat the gallows, they couldn't hang you a second time. Yeah. If the rope broke or they cut you down too soon or whatever. These guys had been pronounced dead, and he thought, well, if I bring him back to life, then I've got to let him go, and I don't want to be responsible, because I think the guy was a murderer. But interesting story, and it just, I mean, they're kind of like in Frankenstein, some of the people thought it was, just an aberration, that they, to the point where I don't think it ever came to torches and pitchforks, but there were people that wanted to, literally run him out of town. I mean, not only the doctor trying to do these things, but he's also a preacher and he's doing it in the church.
Wow. Wow. And this is like the early 1800s. Wow. Can you imagine?
Yeah,
so
1825, I think.
That's one story that we know about. Now, what's going on that we don't know about?
Right, the ones that you didn't hear about, the ones that worked in secret and didn't let everybody around know what was going on. I think Dr. Foster there, being a preacher, he liked to speak in front of people. He was known to be a great orator and very flamboyant in his delivery and things. So there you go. He liked the attention, but probably got a little too much. But yeah, if imagine that if that had happened, out in a barn in the middle of the country with nobody around, who knows what might have happened. And for the fact that he didn't want to bring a criminal back, there's other people that wouldn't have cared or might have even delighted in bringing somebody back. Well, say if you were, like an evil villain type person, you take a condemned murderer that had been hanged until dead, bring him back to life and send him out to kill your enemies.
Yeah, which is not unlike...
That's a movie plot right there.
That is absolutely a movie plot. But, you're sitting here saying this, and I'm thinking, no, it's not unlike zombies. And not the zombies we're thinking of nowadays, where, we're talking about The Walking Dead or Fear the Walking Dead or anything like that. I'm talking about voodoo, the reanimation of the dead, which absolutely has been, in legend
really
for
good
a long
book
time.
And movie about that serpent in the rainbow.
Yep, there you go.
About voodoo in Haiti, and there's some sort of poisonous powder that they use that they can administer to a person, and it keeps you in almost like a coma or vegetative state. And then when they start coming out, they apparently apply smaller amounts of that so that the people actually function. There was a girl who had died, and the body was missing from the grave, and they eventually found her working, I think it's like in a sugarcane field, but she was under the influence of this zombie powder, and basically the people that were using her as a slave labor had convinced her that she was dead, that you died and we brought you back and you'll do what we say.
Isn't that something?
That's scary to think about.
Yeah, because if you take it and you put it in a movie that, you have from beginning to end, and you have your hero, your heroine, you have your somebody in distress, then they go through all of we have to figure out what it is and how to stop it. And then you have an ending where it's like, unfortunately this monster, whether it be like the old Wolfman, the old Frankenstein, they were like reluctant monsters. They didn't want what they had. They didn't want what they become. And now you've got like the zombie stuff that that's happened in the back. It's been in legend forever. So you've got those, and then it's always, the monsters just so, of course, we're scared and we want it dead and we want it to stop. But, not all monsters want to be monsters or want to be what they are. They're just doing whatever it is they have to do to live, or what they've been told to do or taught to do, which makes a lot of sense. I've always, like I said, I always felt sorry for the Wolfman. I felt sorry for Frankenstein too. I thought the real monster in the old movie Frankenstein's was Dr. Frankenstein, who did it in the first place to put all these parts together to make one. He was like the real monster. But that's interesting as all get out, man. That's just the legends that go behind these things. Once you start digging, like in The Mummy, I always kind of laughed at The Mummy. The movies were scary because the acting around it and the build up and stuff. I'm talking about the old ones. Now the new ones are totally different. They go back and they do the legend, and The Mummy has all kind of powers and can, summon bugs to eat you alive and do all these different things. But back in the day, the mummy just basically got up and walked slowly towards you and backed you into a corner till you died.
Yeah.
Or choked you.
That was the reason I was never that afraid of a mummy, because he was slow.
Yeah.
Like you said, unless you got in a corner or something, you could get away from the mummy. So
parts
Scared
like
me a
that.
little bit.
I
And
know.
also, he's wrapped in all this cloth, a match. And
Yeah, exactly. I never
some,
understood. I never understood that. It was, but everything around it was creepy, and the stuff that was around it that was creepy was, like I said, it wasn't so much the mummy himself, unless you were locked in a room with it, and then you better think on your feet because it was powerfully strong apparently.
yeah.
But if you could just outrun it or unwrap it or set it afire, you'd probably be all right. But it was the
Like in
legend
the
behind it.
cartoons where you grab an end of the linen and run with it and spin the mummy around. I think that was Abbott and
Yeah,
Costello.
right. Those were my favorite. Abbott and Costello, Meet Frankenstein, Meet the Mummy. Those are the best movies. If the listeners have not seen those movies, get a Saturday and get those movies because Abbott and Costello, Meet Frankenstein, and the Mummy and Dracula and all
The
that. They're
Wolfman,
fabulous.
they
Yes,
basically parodied all the Universal monsters in there.
it
That's
was
some of the best
fabulous.
comedy you'll ever see. I'm
Yeah.
convinced of that.
But the scary stuff around the mummy's always been the legend, and in real life, obviously there has been many curses and things like that. Being Native American, I never quite understood where the cutoff point was, where it was okay to dig up dead people to find artifacts. That's always been a kind of a stickler thing with me because they've tried to do it in mounds. Architects and not architects, excuse me, archaeologists would say, okay, well, we want to dig up the mounds and see what these people were like. We want to get the artifacts and the pottery and the stuff and the jewelry and piece together this. But then you think, well, you wouldn't go over here to this cemetery and start digging up people here to do the same thing. And then you bring up, well, it's historical. It's, we need to do this for, to preserve the traditions of the people and all that. So when you start doing things like that, you start delving into, if that land is protected in some way by whether you say spirit or some type of curse. And we know that in King Tut's tomb, there was definitely a curse set up with that one. And that really happened. Do you know anything about that and how all that came to be?
Yeah, well, you have the tomb curses. I mean, the curse of the pharaohs, as they called it. It was basically any tomb that you ran across had some sort of curse. Some of them were, a little more benign. There was some like, that nobody would want to buy your goods and your heirs wouldn't inherit much, But then there are others that were more hardcore. But the one with the Tut is what's the guy's Lord Cavernon. I think I'm saying that right. He was one of the backers of the financial backers of the excavation team, and he was actually present at the tomb's opening. And then he died about a year later, or less than a year later, from a mosquito bite. That became infected. Okay, I pulled something up here. 4 months and 7 days after the opening of the tomb.
Wow.
And there were similar strange things, but then there are others that have debunked it. There was a security guard that slept in the tomb with the treasures and things and never had any problem. But, he wasn't there to steal it. He was there to protect it. So.
Exactly. And that's the same thing I had heard as well, because it's all about, you go back to that thing of what's your intent. It was the ones who were moved by greed that wanted it opened. And, you see that through how many different Indiana Jones movies and things like that. There's, as outlandish and crazy and entertaining as those movies are, there's a lot of fact-based information in those things. And
there is.
Yeah,
there really is.
There absolutely is. And, you go back and you start digging in that. And like I said, with the, even with the old mummy movies, the fear build up in that, and the thing that you have to worry about is everything that's around that mummy, the curse.
Even if you got away from the mummy, the curse could come back and smack you down.
Exactly.
And I've read some scientific based stuff about those curses, and the Egyptians were very smart. I mean, they were advanced, supremely advanced for their time. And I've read some scientific papers, research papers, where they think that some of the curses, quote unquote, may have been something as simple as viruses or bacteria. Like a streptococci or something that they sealed in the tomb there when you break it open, you breathe that in, you get sick.
Yeah.
And then I've also read that they think that some of the materials in there were radioactive, maybe raw uranium or something like that, which, in a way, it wouldn't surprise me if the Egyptians knew about it. But if you didn't know what you were in contact with, you could get radiation poisoning, radiation burns from stuff that was in the tomb. So it's just, something to think about. Like I said, they were a very advanced race, and, cursed be those who disturb the rest of the fair. That's right. Pretty broad.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's not the only thing that's been cursed. We've heard about the curse of the Hope Diamond. That's got definitely a long lineage to that too. Anything that was like that was, we've put it here for a reason, and if you disturb it, out of greed or whatever, and you poo-poo the whole fact of, I don't believe in that stuff. Those are usually your last words. Because, either I'll be right back in a haunted in a horror movie, or I don't believe in that stuff and anything that has to do with supernatural, any kind of curses or anything like that when it comes to your zombies and your, the voodoo. And I wouldn't, you have to look at that stuff with a certain amount of respect, because there's stuff like that in every culture around the world. So there's got to be something to it. That's some of your main universal. Of course, we could talk Godzilla. We can talk, that's anything that's, going to get up against radiation or be woke up, or who knows, even like a Jurassic
kind
Park.
Of the same concept, just a lizard instead of a mummy.
Right. The whole Jurassic Park theme. And we know people are messing around with the genetics. We know they're messing around with cloning. We know it. And who knows what's going to come up next that's going to get out of hand. And
they found woolly mammoths frozen in ice and stuff. Well, how simple would it be with the advances that they made? I mean, if you can clone a sheep or you can clone a dog, you can clone a woolly mammoth if you've got the right material.
And they're doing it,
and
people.
Then
they're doing it.
The
you may not hear about it.
Kicks the door down and runs away. What are you going to do?
And it's how many things Jurassic. Have we heard about experiments or things, whether it's biological or otherwise, that got away. I think that's the whole idea behind Stephen King's The Mist. Is basically it was a experiment, something in the military experiment that got away and basically took over the town, and all the things started coming out, and that was it. It was in the mist, and if it surrounded you, you were in there with it. So And I don't think that that's so far-fetched to believe. If they can turn it into a weapon. It's
not. I mean, you look, that's a recurring thing in King's work. The Stand, for example.
Same thing.
Yeah. First time I read that back in the 80s, I had the worst flu that I'd ever had. I had to put it down. It scared me so bad. I was like, I can't read
When
this.
You told me that.
Was the same thing. Military installation, something got loose.
When you told me that.
One of the military guys knew, that he'd been dosed or whatever, took his family and runs and infects the world.
Everything. And that's exactly how it would work. And people, let me look at that anthrax thing we had, Ebola, not too long ago. I mean, your monsters don't have to be 8 foot tall with bolts in their neck, people.
Yeah, you might not even be able to see them. I read about, it was at a military base, and I can't remember where, but they were doing, that type of experiments, with germ and chemical warfare and things, and they found some guys that had died in the shower from, it was like meningitis, some kind of super meningitis, and that was part of the thing, was you got so hot, and apparently they knew that what had happened to them, but they went in there to try to cool off, and they found them dead. And that one, from what I've gathered, I mean, from what they'll admit to, and then what you have to kind of read between the lines, they just avoided a major outbreak of spinal meningitis that's essentially untreatable. And you're talking about something like that. You can't see it. You might not even know that you'd been exposed to it, like with the Ebola and whatnot. And that, literally, that could decimate the globe. That could be another Black Plague, or, back years ago you had measles or cholera.
Polio,
Remember when Diane Student was on, we talked about going to these old historic graveyards, and a lot of times you would see an entire family buried there. There's mom, dad, 6, 7, 8-year-old kid, 3, 4, 5, the infants, and something like that, cholera, yellow fever, whatever, wiped them out completely, scarlet fever. All that is, a modern hemorrhagic version of some of those things, that just, it could literally kill loads and loads of people.
all at once. I mean, it could be smaller than a pen cap, just the stuff, and you drop it on a mass transit and watch it go, and that's scary.
Yeah, if you wanted to weaponize it,
Oh,
that's all you would have to do is find somebody that has it in the early stages and put them on a plane, put them on a subway train, send them to Disney World.
And a lot of people were getting mad because people were getting quarantined and things like that. But man, that's the way it would have to be.
You'd have to. When it comes to something like that, you can't worry about hurting somebody's feelings or violating their civil rights, because that would violate the rights of everybody else to let somebody with a highly communicable, almost instantly deadly disease out wandering around, going to the Costco or whatever.
Well, sure. And I know we're talking about things that can wipe stuff out that's even small, like, little monsters, basically, bacterium and, microorganisms and stuff. Monsters don't have to be big, but
got them under a microscope. Some of those things, I mean, they look like monsters. They look like something out of H.P. Lovecraft.
They do. They absolutely do. And I was wondering, sitting here talking about this, if you ever heard of, it's interesting and it's historical, but it's also so greatly saddens me. I was looking into out here, the earlier settlement, early fort, got you Jamestown, Williamsburg, and all these different forts that were set up in kind of my area. Because everything went up from the coast, from Florida all the way up New York and all that, where all your ports and stuff were when they first started coming over. And when they basically, I forget the man's name, and I certainly don't want to use the wrong one, but they told him, they said, well, you got to get the Indians to move out of here because we want this land. Basically, it came down to that, his superiors. And he said, well, we could go fight them or we do this. But they had some people on the ship that had died of smallpox. And they basically took the blankets and the shirts, and he walked
and
up
gave them to the Indians.
And they walked up to the chief and told him, we will live with your people in peace and harmony. Here's some gifts for you, to show that we're sincere. And
that's just so evil.
Yep. And they walked away, and he went back and he wrote down in his journal exactly what he had done. And was proud of himself for it, because he said, here I got rid of the problem without losing any of our people. And he wrote down, one of the last things he wrote down on the matter was, now all we have to do is sit back and wait. And almost an entire people wiped out.
That's just an imaginary evil, there. But it's true,
that's biological warfare.
Wow.
And that's one of the first ones that I know about. And I'm sure it was used in other, if you go back to China and things like that. That's just one account I knew about here in the early Americas that happened. So, it can definitely be used. So,
and then you have some of these suicide cults and the death cults and stuff like I can't remember the name of it in Japan, that release sarin gas on the subway, in order to kill a bunch of people. And there's been attacks with ricin, which you can make out of castor beans, if you know what you're doing. And it takes so little of it to kill a person that, you say, imagine going to the mall or somewhere and spreading that stuff around. You could kill everybody in there.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. It's just it's horrifying when you think about it, and then you think about it. It's like it's like flying in a plane. I know this is a silly thing to say, but when you're flying in a plane and you walk on there and you say hi to everybody and you sit down in the seat, you're basically trusting everybody who's in control of your life now. From the aircraft controllers to the pilot you've never met, to the to the co-pilot, to everybody else, and everybody that's in control. And you figure, okay, they would never knowingly do anything. They're going to do everything to the best of their ability. And that's kind of the way we think about everything that's in power. So the saying they would never do that, hold on a minute, they have. What I'm saying? It's in history, and that's scary.
There are pilots that have crashed planes, for political or religious reasons or whatever. And not only that, but I mean, you've got the other passengers continuing with them, and you've got shoe bombers and underwear bombers, and
we take a lot for granted.
It's a whole different world now than it used to be.
And if you think about it, though, Steve, what you just said, I mean, it obviously we're pulling up stuff from way back. It seems like it's always been. The only thing that amazes me is that really we're still here. Isn't that just amazing with all of the stuff that can go on? And we've talked about monsters big and small, actually, from tiny little microscopic all the way up.
Ministers.
Yeah, there you go, ministers. But the scariest monster is the one that you don't know about, and you just hope never shows up. And that's probably the biggest one right there. There was another one that just popped up in my head. We've got like Jekyll and Hyde. Well, Jekyll and Hyde, we see that all the time too. No, not necessarily that particular thing, somebody taking a potion to change into somebody else. We see that happening all the time, where somebody's pretending to be one way but is really a monster behind the, as far as your serial killers and stuff. You can have whole families, they'll never have an idea of this person's other life. So that's kind of a Jekyll and Hyde thing there. But the Invisible Man is one I wanted to remember, because boy, I loved those movies, the old ones, the old black and white movies. And the Invisible Man, I forget who played him, and I really don't even remember how it came about. I don't know whether he was a scientist and he had a potion and what he was trying to do, but boy, he had a blast. He used to run through and bother people and do all kinds of different things, and he turned a little evil there toward the end. He got out of hand. But what made me think about was trying to place it like we're doing, like a fictional monster. Really, he was a monster in that point. And was there anything now that was similar to it? And you know what? There is, Steve. We've got the whole Camellia thing, the Robert Guffey novels.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And we've got, the invisible, basically, in this case, we don't say invisible, we say cloaked. They're extremely camouflaged to the point where you can't see them. You could be in the same room. But if you
can't see it, it's invisible. No matter what reason you can't see it.
Exactly.
If you can't see it, it might as well be invisible.
So they're not taking a potion to become... They're wearing some kind of almost like the movie's Predator. Now, you and I have talked about this before, where we know of several accounts that that's shown up. And one of them was the hunter. Tell that story, the bow hunter. That was recent, too. Wasn't that in the past, 6 years or so?
Yeah, just the past couple of years, I think. Okay. Yeah, there's a lady, and I've heard Steph Young talk about this on some show and stuff. It's in her books. But yeah, a lady was bow hunting. And it was kind of in the afternoon. She was up in a tree stand, and she kept noticing something. And, when you're hunting, you're up in a tree, you become hyper aware of everything. And any little movement, anything that could be a deer or sheep or whatever you're hunting. And she keeps noticing this little glimmer, this little bit of movement, something just not quite right in a tree, just a few trees over from where she's at about the same height level. And then as it turns out, when she looks closer at it, that's kind of what she described it as, is like the monster, if you will, in Predator, that it was a kind of an outline or a shape of something that kind of glimmered around the edges. So like when it moved, it would kind of glitch, but it was like looking through, she said plastic or saran wrap or something like that. And that, that's, I believe we have that technology. There's a video on YouTube of, I think it's from Afghanistan, where you see a tank coming down a street, and then you see just a little, not even a blur of movement, almost like a shadow by this building. And as the shadow comes out, then suddenly when it reaches the tank, it materializes, is the only word I can think of, into a soldier. He opens a hatch and climbs in the tank, and they go off. They're obviously there to pick him up. But he had somehow, so other than just that little bit of shadow you could see on the video, he was invisible. And there are companies, there are tech companies, I know in Japan at a university level, they've developed, they call it like a Harry Potter invisibility cloak, but it's made up of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of tiny little flexible cameras on this fabric. And whatever is on one side is captured by those cameras and then projected on the other side, so that you're seeing what's on the other side of it, thus looking through it. And if they stand perfectly still, they blend in and they look invisible. And Amazing. If they have that on a university level, I mean, if kids in their 20s have got that, imagine what the military has.
Yep. And that's just amazing. And then we're just talking about what's happening here. And you start bringing in, if you believe that there could be aliens, and you and I absolutely do. I mean, I believe more that there is than there, because it just doesn't make sense that there's something more than this, that this is it. It doesn't make sense. Not to me anyway. But what would aliens have? My gosh.
Well,
I mean,
that goes way back even into the 50s and 60s in the UFO reports, where whatever shift or craft that they're looking at, it seems to have some sort of cloaking device that
right.
can make itself not only invisible to the human eye, but invisible to radar.
Right. Now, and then the books, and I know you and I both read Camelio. In there, I know I love that book. And the interviews from Robert Guffey are amazing. The one that Zoriah Ascath did on Where Did the Road Go? If you ever want to hear a good Camelio interview, I suggest to the listeners to pull that up. You'd be riveted at the end of your seat. It's amazing. But basically, it was a targeted individual, and they were trying to get information or whatever, and they had used people who were short, and smaller in stature, because they figured if they could cloak them and get them in and out, they could move around undetected a little bit better. Because if you're moving through, you're still changing the air. You still feel, if a ghost walks by, you feel that it's something walked by you. The air changes, so it would be less invasive. So they're using, they were using smaller people on this guy, and it was just amazing. The abilities, if what's in that book is true, and again, that was written years ago, what do they have out there? And I look at it this way, Steve, if you look at just in nature, how many things in nature are not just camouflaged? Now, we know that camouflaging is amazing. I was ex-military. They show you camouflage. They got that from Native Americans. Native Americans got it from nature. Look at the chameleon. You see them on your these new commercials for that paint. I forget what it is, Valspar or something paint, and it's a cute commercial. And every time it touches a paint swatch, it changes color, and it's put its paw over here and it changes color. So if nature can do that, why couldn't military figure or anything else, or aliens or whatever, figure out a different way to use that and basically uses it as a weapon, or at least an assistance.
Yeah, and the invisibility, the mimicry and the camouflage and things. When you look at something like a rattlesnake, they'll blend in with the rocks. You can be right on top of a rattler and not know it unless he alerts to you. And then you're talking camouflage. Look at something as simple as a ghillie suit.
Yep.
You put a man in a ghillie suit, put him in the bushes, you can't see him.
You're not going to see a sniper.
So imagine something that's an electronic version of that.
That's what I'm saying.
It's just, it blows the mind.
It does blow the mind.
And that was the thing in Camelio, the individual that they targeted, had been a homeless person. He had been a major drug addict, had mental issues prior to all this. What better person to experiment with? Because nobody's going to believe a word they say.
Yep.
And that was basically the conclusion that the guy reached. He's like, that's why they picked me. And
and he's not the only one. Now they've come out with even more that have, stepped forward and said, whatever. So, Invisible Man, the way it was predicted in, the old movies, which was fabulous, and he definitely turned into a monster. It was more about also not just the invisibility, but the natural breakdown of the human entity that would have that kind of power. What would he do with it? What would he do with that? Yeah.
With great power comes great authority, or whatever the saying is. And but majority of people, if they had that power, they would abuse it. When I was a kid, I used to have this discussion with other kids. If you could pick one superpower, what would it be? People would want to fly or do this. I always picked invisibility.
Yep.
You could do anything if you were invisible. Just like you said, you'd have to kind of stay along the corners and along the wall to where people wouldn't bump into you. But if you're invisible, you could go anywhere.
Absolutely true. And that was one of his big things, because he would have to strip down, because when he put on clothes, it would just look like he had the wraps around his head and his hands, but then he'd strip down his clothes. Boy, you wouldn't see him at all. And he was getting cold. Wasn't he go out and he was going outside naked, and he was getting colds and everything else. He was sneezing and he would sneeze. He would give himself away and stuff. That was crazy, but it was a really cool concept. because again, it was like that natural breakdown. Like I remember Stephen King talking about how he liked the first Shining, the movie adaptation of the book. The book was, again, different and always deeper and went into use your imagination and stuff, but that's not what he was talking about. And it wasn't that he didn't like Jack Nicholson as the part, but he said the book was supposed to be the gradual breakdown of a normal father figure. Yes, he had some problems drinking and stuff, but he was trying to bring himself back and win his wife's trust and child's trust back, of course. But he wasn't batshit crazy. And,
Right.
From the beginning. And Jack Nicholson kind of had that connotation, everything he had played before, that he was basically crazy as all get out.
He was crazy anyway, I think,
Right.
in real life, to some extent.
Yeah. So that's what he didn't like. There wasn't enough gradual breakdown of that, and he thought it was lost in that movie. So that's why he redid it and made that series, the TV series, or whatever it was, a miniseries or something he did, because they were really concentrating on that, the natural breakdown of it. And I think that's what it was kind of with The Invisible Man as well. And then a lot of the old monster movies, because once you get that power in that thing, unless you've got some rage that you have to kill to eat, or you have to kill to, like a vampire to get blood and all this other stuff to live, or just a natural craziness of being a wild monster. That was the big thing with the invisibility. So if he had the power, what would he do with it? And that's what worries me with some of these cloaking mechanisms and things like that. What are they going to do with it? What are they doing with it? So that's the scary part there. With your mummies, you got your curses and the things behind it. That's the thing that's scary there for me. And the other universal, like we said too, is like all your Mothra, and you got Godzilla and all the big stuff that comes to destroy and your buildings fall down. You don't understand. But man, the creature from the Black Lagoon, what was that all about? Remember that one?
Probably the only Universal monster that really, really scared me. And that's one thing. I grew up near a lake. So, it wasn't a big stretch lake. Okay, there's probably monsters in the lake now.
Yep.
Along with quicksand. I was always scared of quicksand when I was a kid because I'd see it on TV, and if you got in quicksand, you were done for.
You were done for, and it got everybody. It got Frankenstein. I was scared too. I think everybody that grew up in our generation worried about quicksand. We had a lot out here, marshes, and not marshes, but reeds and beach stuff.
I've never seen any in real life. I know it exists, but just even Mingo. If you watch Daniel Boone, Mingo got in the quicksand. If Daniel Boone hadn't saved his butt, Mingo was gone.
That's some scary stuff. I mean, in a lot of movies, the quicksand was its own.
I'm not watching where I'm walking. Next thing I know, I'm waist deep in something, and the more you struggle, the faster you sink.
That's true.
Oh, and that'd be a horrible way to drown in the mud.
Oh, geez, the quicksand. Oh, man. Yeah, I think growing up as a kid, we often thought that there was a whole lot more quicksand out there than there really is. I don't know, but that one to this day still gets me when I think about it. That's for sure. But the creature from the Black Lagoon, anything could be in the water. Loch Ness Monster. I don't know that the Loch Ness Monster ever did anything to anybody. It's just a sighting that nobody knows what it is.
Yeah,
it's the
just friendly, and it pops up to say, hey, what can I have a bite of that sandwich or whatever? And people are like, oh my God, it's a monster.
Yeah, and
but
it's just
from the sheer size of it, I think, if nothing else.
Well, that too.
But that was the thing about the creature from the Black Lagoon, was the way. And I don't think it was evil. I think it had probably a less than prurient interest in the girl there, but the scene, and it's like burned into my memory, where she's swimming. And it's right there just under her. And she has no idea. And it's like reaching with its clawed fins, it's just about to touch her, caress her leg. Like you've been wading in the lake or the ocean and felt something brush up against your leg before. Was it a piece of seaweed? Was it a fish? Was it, the creature from the Black Lagoon? What's in there? And that's, I think, what scares me the most, was it's something that you can't see and that you don't know is there, but it sees you and it knows you're there, and it's going to check you out or eat you or whatever it wants to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I wondered watching that movie. That's the scene that got me too. But of course, the scene that got me the most, that really burns into my mind, is for some reason they're transporting a cow on this boat.
I know the scene.
On this boat. And it was more like a tugboat, really. It was going down. Wasn't it in the Amazon? Wasn't it? Was it something like that?
Something like that.
Something
Yeah,
similar, yeah.
I probably haven't seen it since I was a child, but
Right, me
there's
either.
certain parts of it than that I know the
Oh
scene you're
gosh.
talking about.
Oh no, it wasn't one of my favorites. It's just because it scared me. Anything in the water scares me like that. I don't know what it is, but they're transporting this cow. For what reason I don't know, and the cow falls in the water, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, piranha. And they're just attack this thing, and it's just this fury of water and bubbles and foam and things flying up in the air, and it's seconds, and then nothing. And then all of a sudden, the completely clean skeleton of the cow rises to the top of the water, and boom, it's done.
Yeah.
Now, I'm thinking she was just swimming in there, for one.
Uh-huh.
The creature from the Black Lagoon's in there and are not attacking it. So I have a hard time understanding the whole piranha thing. I remember going to Tennessee Aquarium when I lived in Alabama, taking my kids, and they had a piranha fish with a diver down there. There was a python in the water, and the piranha wasn't bothering anything, but have you seen the teeth on a piranha fish?
Oh, yeah.
Monster.
I've been to the same aquarium at Ripley's Aquarium in the Smokies, and it's just like,
monster.
Wow. And I used to know a guy that had some piranha in a tank. He'd feed him raw hamburger.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no.
And they would literally, they knew when it was feeding time, they would almost like jump up out of the water.
Oh, stop. I can't.
That was another one of my childhood fears, like the quicksand, was piranha. I stayed out of the lake. There might be, and I knew that, okay, yeah, that's from South America or wherever, but what if there's a freshwater version that they haven't discovered yet? I don't want to be the first one eaten by it.
Yeah, and not to mention, the snakes, all around the world, there's all kinds of, there's the anaconda. That was a great movie. I thought that one was not bad, because there really are anaconda like that. So anything that wants to eat, like I said, sees you as a cheeseburger, can be a monster. Even though we understand it, we know everything about it, all like the intrigue and the mystery is taken out of it. But in some of these other things, I think that's what scares us the most too, because we don't know what it is. It's been seen or cited, people, popped up on people like Mothman. We don't know what it is. Many people saw it. It chased cars. It ran alongside of cars, sat on a bridge. And then the bridge collapsed. Was it there to warn? Was it there because it knew it was going to happen? Was it just a coincidence? We don't know, but there's mystery and intrigue around it we don't understand, and that makes it a monster to us, I guess. And it had seemed to have, there was more to that Mothman thing too, where wasn't there like phone calls and weird things and
weird things, and people would answer the phone and hear themselves talking, and just all kinds of weird stuff, and people would get warnings and might just finish a conversation with somebody sitting in the room with them there, and the phone would ring. They pick it up, and a different voice would repeat the conversation back to them. So you had the Men in Black, and you had all this other stuff going on.
There was a lot to that. There was a lot to that. But again, it's that mystery and the intrigue where it's like we don't know.
And you don't know what its intent is.
Right.
And that's the scary part.
It is. Now, that could be anything. It could be a cryptid where it's just, an animal that's here or whatever you want to call it, a being that's here and we just don't know about it. Because in Monsters, when we talked about Jersey Devil and things like that, like, is it just legend? Too many people have seen it. What's going on? It's been mistaken as swamp gas, all the different things that people try to pass things off as. But there's too many sightings of too many different weird things that's going on. We've got what's going on in and around Chicago right now. We've got a lot of sightings of bigger than normal birds for some reason all of a sudden. Did you happen to see that video? I sent you a video not too long ago. Did you see the size of that eagle?
Yeah, and eagles, I didn't think got that big. I mean, I know they're a huge bird of prey, but that thing was huge.
I know. And I don't know, it could very well be a mutation of some kind. I mean, legend.
Fukushima eagle.
Yeah.
Because normally they only get to be around 14 pounds, which you think about it, that's big for a bird. I mean,
sure is.
around 3 feet tall, maybe a little less, have a wingspan of 5, 6 feet.
Hmm.
But that thing, it looked like it weighed 50 pounds or something. And
At least.
whatever it was, it was eating some other animal. I think it was a rabbit.
Hmm.
Might have even been a small deer. It
It
was
looked like
hard
a
to
small
tell.
deer to me. Yeah, it did. It looked like a small deer. But that
But
thing was huge.
that's,
If it was a real thing, and it wasn't Photoshopped, because again, nowadays we don't know. But I'm not just going on that. I'm going on multiple sightings of people seeing huge birds. I'm going on Native American tradition of the thunderbird. I personally saw what my mother and I saw in the Dismal Swamp again. What I was told was a thunderbird. And later on, I mean, that thing, the only way I can describe how big it was, you've got a road that basically the road was only as wide at this time. We're talking about the 70s now, late 70s. So the road at that time was just about the size if you put two regular size, mid-sized sedans next to each other and just right next to touching each other. Both doors on the passenger side doors, if they're coming at different directions, would be, that's where the edge of the road was. And then it was nothing but swamp. I mean, it would drop down and swamp. So you've got all your reeds, you've got the water right there. It was just black, murky nastiness. And then as you went off, the trees would get thicker and thicker and thicker. So it was definitely wider than two, I'd say Mercury's Cadillacs. The old Mercury Cadillacs when cars were cars and looked like tanks. Those size.
right.
So the wingspan would pass that. And it came down out, through a break in the trees because the trees did a canopy. And we're just, driving along. And like I said, my mom would always drive real slow there because if a car came by you, you had a real good chance of going off into the swamp or losing a tire or two going off, or you're getting stuck. So you were slow going down that road. And things would jump out in front of you like, pig, goat things and stuff and other animals. So it came out the break of the trees and it swooped down. So it swooped down like it was going to like try to pick up the car, like if it was going after prey. And then all of a sudden just went up. So I got to see the undercarriage of it as it went over the windshield. And it was just like, whoa, this thing is huge. And even estimating and taking in that when we're young, when we're kids, we remember everything bigger. This thing, I mean, it was touching both sides. The feathers on the tips of its wings were touching both sides of the trees as it went by. Because my mother said, I don't know how it just did that and not break a wing. And then it went up and it was gone. And she said that to her, that was a thunderbird. So they're supposed to be that big or bigger, but it seems like we're seeing more of that now. Plus, we're seeing the humanoid creatures, a lot
Winged
of them.
humanoids. I don't know if you're familiar with it's the blog that Lon has, Phantoms
Yes.
and Monsters. He has people call in, report stuff to him. Just about every email that I get from him, every update, there's a winged humanoid sighting in there from somewhere.
Yep. And I don't know, it seems to be like there's a lot more. And now I keep getting these calls of, you were telling me something, I can't remember the name of it, yesterday. I don't know whether it was the awful or the what's it. I think it was the awful, where it looks at you or something like that. But I keep getting these reports now. These people aren't reporting to me on the air. They're telling me in emails. They're telling me on the telephone when I'm talking to them. They don't know each other. And from a couple of stories back from years ago, before I ever did this podcast, there seems to be a lot of sightings of this larger than human. So anytime they can catch them by a doorway or a light post, or another one it was a fence going into a gated community, so he kind of knows how tall that fence is for just eyeing and guessing the height of these things. They run about 8 to 9 foot tall. They are wearing usually black. It's going to be like a black cloak or a black type of a cape looking thing, and then sometimes like black pants, or you know what I mean, like a... You can definitely tell that there's legs in the apparel that they're wearing, because when they walk, it separates and it's not a long cloak. Some of them are wearing a long cloak. They're all wearing a hood. None of them have a face. In 2 accounts, the thing has been almost like the hood was sewn up in front of it, which is weird. So it almost seems like it could be like a Halloween-y costume that somebody put together and did that, but they're walking around. They can see out of it because they're not bumping into anything. But this is the creepy part. They're either hanging on the edge of a roof, where they're sitting on the edge of a roof, sitting and looking out over everything. Very much like two people reported it was very much like the old movie Prophecy, where... what was his name? Christopher Walken was an angel, a fallen angel or angel gone bad, something. And he was sitting on things like perched like a bird. Well, that's what these things are doing. They're perched like a bird. They're sitting on weird spots, like on the top of a light pole along a street, on top of a light pole. So you're talking about an 8 to 9 foot tall thing with a cloak, sitting on top of a light pole, sitting on the edge of a roof. One saw him walking. Now, this is all different states now, and one out of the country. One was at 4 o'clock in the morning in Midwest, and he's driving, and he goes to work. He gets into work early, like 4:30, 5 a.m., so right before the sun starts coming up where he lives. And he's driving, and he sees one walking through a gate in a gated community coming out of, and headed toward the road. And he's sitting parked at a red light, and there's no other cars on the road. And he notices this thing, and he's like, what in the world? Because he's so tall. And right away, it's a tall, ominous figure all dressed in black, wearing a hood, and from what he could see, no face that he could see. And he's like, okay, it's a little strange. So he's like, right now he's looking to see if there's any traffic coming that he could just burn the red light. So he does, and he goes ahead and makes a right turn so he, could get past the red light. And he looks back out the window, out of his driver's side window, and he looks toward the figure, and the figure turns and looks at him. And that's when he realizes it doesn't have a face. So now it knows it sees him. He finishes his right turn and looks out his rearview mirror and his driver's side mirror and doesn't see it. So he stops because he doesn't see it in the mirror, and he rolls down his window and sticks his head out and turns and looks where it was, and it's still there. It just didn't show up in the mirror.
Wow.
Now, I've had 3 accounts that told me that they're not showing up in mirrors, either usually because they're in their car and they pass it and go to look like they think it's like a hitchhiker dressed for Halloween or something. And then they look back in the mirror and it's not there, but then they look out and turn around and look and it's still there. So I don't know what these things are, but it's different people that don't know each other, that don't know I've been told the story. You see what I'm saying? It's crazy. Right. I call them night walkers, because most of the time they see him at night. But it's the creepy part about it is it's the mirror thing where it's no reflection, but it's the fact that each one of these things, as soon as it clicked in and it knew it somehow knows you see it. Even if they're in traffic and there's other people in the traffic driving, these people aren't seeing it, but it knows you saw it. You see? And then at this one instance, it went from where it was on the roof of a house, and then it was on the light pole before he got to the light pole while he was driving, doing about 30 miles an hour. Now, how does that happen?
Wow.
It's creepy.
Well, in the Bible, it talks about angels that are called watchers. And that's what they do. They come down and they watch humankind. And then you're getting off into the Nephilim and some of those stories, where the angels had offspring with the daughters of men and all that. But there's some of those are described as, that type of thing, that winged humanoids.
Wow. I don't know, but there's just so many accounts of it. And if you figure, like we always say, if you take, say, I've probably heard, I don't know, maybe 5, 6 that had fit into this category where, I tried not to say anything for a couple of years. Like, I'm not going to say that, it never has a face or the hood is sewn up. The thing, it looks at you when you notice it. Like, you could be in a crowd of people walking across the street, like they do in New York where they cross the street in a crowd. And this thing could be on a building, but as soon as you notice it, it seems to telepathically picks up the fact that you've connected into its energy or its thought. Or
and
whatever.
I've had that happen before, not with any creature, but just a person. Sometimes
Yes.
I would see a person that looked weird or out of place, and I'm
Yes.
thinking, that doesn't look right. And then all of a sudden they would turn around and like lock eyes with me, like
Yes.
they heard what I was saying.
Yes.
I've had that happen a few times, and it's always very disquieting, very disturbing, because
Yes.
it's like they're reading your thoughts, or they know that you're looking at them. So it's like,
Absolutely. In my personal experience, I've wound up calling them grinners, because usually and I've
green
told you
ants
that
when
story. Yeah, I've told you those stories where, and I'm going to say probably less than a dozen, but close to it. And I'm not looking for it. You see what I'm
Mhm.
saying? And it's usually, it comes on me like I can feel a certain energy change. Like I can feel something's coming, like
Mhm.
something wicked this way comes. And,
Right.
I never know if it's just going to be a person that's having a real, like a real depression, or just like a real bad guy. It could be anything like that. It could be somebody that's just having a real bad day and about to blow. Who knows? But it's
Right.
an energy pressure change. And I know what that feels like. And
Hmm.
then I'll start looking around, because usually I'm in a situation that I can't really leave. Like I'm at work, I'm in a, I'm at, in public where I'm working or something like that. I can't just cut out. And I'm
Yeah.
starting to look for it. And this one time, I was helping somebody. I was working in customer service, and I was a manager, and I was helping somebody behind the register, and she had some kind of issue going on with her cash register. I can't remember what it was, but I was standing there trying to help her get through it and all that kind of stuff. And the line was there, and I could feel this, and I couldn't shake it. And I'm like, I know that there's one here. And I'm looking, and I'm trying to figure out who it is. Like I'm looking around, and I'm like, no, it's not her. And I'm trying to feel on the energy and stuff. And then here comes this lady. We got whatever it was fixed, and I stayed with her just to make sure it didn't, the issue with the register didn't continue. And I was helping her get caught back up, because now we've held up the line. You know how it goes. So
Uh-huh.
here comes this carriage, shopping cart, and the lady's taking, I think it was big stuff. It was like picture frames or something. She's taking them out, and she's very well dressed, very nicely dressed, like she just came out of a lawyer's office or something. She had beautiful little gray tight dress on and pearls, and her hair up, and she was just very well, very act very refined. She was just very slim lady, very nice looking. And I'm thinking, I'm not getting it off of her, but it's coming from that direction. What is going on? And then all of a sudden, I realized that in the cart, because now the cart's getting pushed further, because she's taking the picture frames and stuff out of it. And now she's pushing the cart closer to where I can see what's coming. There's a young boy in the cart, and he's probably around 3 or 4. Very well dressed, looks like Little Lord Fauntleroy, but in tweed instead of in, velvet like they would have been. I mean, he had like the vest and the white button-up shirt with the button-up stuff. He had the little shorts and the little, kind of like patent leather shoes. It was kind of creepy if you think about it. And the little, the little socks and stuff. And he's playing with something in his hands. I don't know what it was. And she pushes the cart further along, and it's getting stronger. And I'm like, what? It's not coming off this lady. What's going on? She pushes the cart again, and I'm lined up with this kid, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's it's a child or something that's going on with this kid. And I'm thinking, is he sad? What's going on? Like maybe he was just had a fit or something. Because it's hard to
Hmm.
discern the energy with that many people moving around. It's just hard. You got to really zero in. And as soon as I looked at him and started thinking, like, is there something wrong with this child? Because I'm honestly thinking maybe he's an abused child. Maybe there's something like that, because it was that kind of energy,
Uh-huh.
something devastatingly strong. And as soon as I thought, what's going on with this child? I hope he's okay. Um, he turned and looked at me, and he locked eyes with me, and a big grin came across his face. And the minute he locked into my energy, he knew I knew, and I knew he knew. And there was
Hmm.
something going on with that kid. Like it was somebody, I can't explain it, but that was a grinner. And I've had it most of the time. It's the only time I've ever had it from a little kid. Most of the time, it's people. You walk into a store. I've had people do that and turn and lock eyes with me and hiss at me.
Yeah.
Hiss at me.
I had an encounter like that once, and I wasn't very old myself. I was probably, 11 or 12, and I'd gone into this little grocery store near where we live. I think I bought a Coke or some candy or something. And I was coming back out. There's a lady got a little kid by the hand. He's probably maybe 3, 4. And I look down at this kid, and about the time I look down, he looks up at me, and the pupils of his eyes were like a cat.
Oh my, yeah.
It was the weirdest thing. And just, I don't even know how to describe the look that he gave me. He didn't grin, but he gave me just kind of furrowed his brow and just gave me the most evil look. I mean, this little sweet little kid, but he looks like, he's telling me mentally, I'm going to rip your throat out if you don't quit looking at me.
Right.
But he had cat eyes. I mean, absolutely, they were animal eyes. I've never seen that before. And I got the heebie-jeebies and got on out of there.
I don't know if that's where that whole cat people thing comes from, or, of course, we talked about black-eyed kids before, too. I mean, so much is said with the eyes, and I can't explain it was, I don't want to say terror, because, I mean, I think it was more shock than anything else that I realized that it was coming out of this kid. But the fact that he knew I knew and I knew he knew, and it's that look. And it's the same like you just said. It's like, keep your mouth shut. We're going to go on about our business. Everything's going to be cool here. That kind of thing, like, whoa. And I couldn't get away from it fast enough. And I don't know. I mean, coming from an adult, it's just scary. But, man, yeah, I understand. And not to confuse that with the grinning man. Now, I know there's been sightings of the grinning man. I know that we've heard about that one. It's different. That's a whole different thing. We're not talking about a smile that goes across like a Joker, like ear to ear kind of thing. It's just unnaturally large mouth with this grin. And it's the same type of locked in. It sees you, see it, and that whole terror thing. But you can't really put that into words when you're in a crowd like that. And you, like you said, you lock into somebody. So what's going on there? Is that alien? Is it this? Is it possession? Is it what's going on? Because you can feel the energy of the evil. You get that before you see the person. And I don't know how to explain that to people, but there are things that walk through, this world that are that way. And that's for sure. I don't know if people get that when they see some of these cryptid things that we're going to talk about. I don't know. I think a lot of times it's a startling because you see something you don't expect to see in your situation, whether it's at your window or in the woods, you're walking and all of a sudden, bam, it's there, or it shows up. If they're getting, in some cases, in some stories, you have that, don't you, Steve? Where they'll feel the fear before, or they're getting that fear energy off of it. It's not just, I'm startled by what I'm seeing kind of fear.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like what people describe with the black-eyed kids. There's been people that felt something wasn't right before an encounter. They knew something, just like the air had changed. Almost like there was, for lack of a better phrase, like electricity in the air, or pressure, humidity. Something had changed, and the air felt charged, even supercharged, and then that would lead up to some type of anomalous sighting or an encounter, and I think people are more in tune to that. I've had things like that happen where I might pass by a dwelling or an office building or something, and you start getting this weird vibe. There was a house over in Cumberland County, Tennessee, that I would drive by maybe a couple times a year, and I'd always just get the weirdest feeling off that house. Just something was not right there. And then eventually I inquired to some of the locals, and it was a murder house. A guy had murdered 2 kids in there, like back in the 40s or something. But just driving by in the car, I could feel the house coming on the road, before I even was in sight. There was just, and that happens, places warehouse that energy. They absorb that energy. And it's been attributed to, things like the stone, quartz, and things like that. Quartz is wild anyway. I mean, you have a quartz movement in your watch. There's electricity in there. There's in there. So who's to say? You think about a videotape or an audio tape. All that is ferrous oxide on mylar plastic. So it's not too much of a stretch to think, well, if you can imprint things on this, to play back, that you could do that with a house or a piece of property, or even out in the woods on just a more rudimentary level. And I think that accounts for some of the repetitive hauntings that you have, the ones that aren't interactive, where it's impressed upon that place and somehow stored, and it plays back over and over. But then there's also, which like we were just talking about, like an evil sense, an evil energy that's not the same thing. It's not that type of imprint. It's a different, it's
Right.
a living, palpable energy. You can feel it, you can taste it, you can smell it. The hair stands up on your arms.
Yeah.
It's just,
I've had people describe certain things when they tasted copper in their mouth. We talk about stuff that you and I have also encountered, like we're walking through the woods and all of a sudden everything stops. Like the birds stop singing.
yeah.
The squirrels stop moving, and they're not even sending out
I've even
any
had
signal.
like the wind stop, and everything is so absolutely quiet. It's deafening. It's like you're in a vacuum.
Yep.
There is no sound whatsoever. And then gradually, it just comes back. I've never had it come back all of a sudden, but it's like a gradual, but like somebody turning the volume knob on an old radio or something, It's just, and that is the weirdest thing.
Yeah.
And I have no explanation for that.
I don't either, but I've had it happen. And if you're ever with anybody that spends an awful lot of times in the woods, say your Native American trackers or people like that, they'll tell you the same thing. And again, you and I have always said, well, I wonder if that has anything to do with the missing 911 and things like that. Because, again, I still think that's more of a portal thing.
I think it
that's
absolutely does.
Yeah. But then again, nature is a big teller. Feelings are a big teller. All those energies, because, just in my backyard alone, I can walk out there and I'm like, okay, the hawk is near. There's, a predator of some kind around, because everything is different out here right now. The energy's changed. And that's on a small scale. I'm not hearing the birds. Nothing's moving around. The chipmunks aren't running. I'm not even hearing a squirrel or even chickadees. They've got the tiny little birds. They've got, I'm no bird expert, but I can tell you they've got like 7 or 8 different warnings that they put out for different type of predators. I think that's amazing. A chipmunk has several different ones. Squirrel too. It'll tell you, basically it's telling you it's not just a predator, it's the hawk. Look up. It's this, look over here.
Right.
So the woods, when something like that happens, they're telling you by saying nothing that something big is coming. And in a lot of these accounts of people witnessing different cryptids and different monsters, they have that same sense that's going on in these situations. Do you have any stories from those weird and wonderful cryptids and monsters being seen out there?
Oh gosh, there's so many. But one thing I did want to touch on, we were talking about the invisibility and stuff earlier.
Okay.
If you follow in some of the other missing individual stuff, like the ones where people have gone missing, not in the woods, but from urban areas, like they've got video of the guy walking into a bar, the bar shuts down, it empties out, everybody goes home, the guy's never seen again. He's seen going in, he's not seen ever coming out.
On any camera, not just like the bars.
Right. So there could an invisibility cloak work for that? And then sometimes people that are seen going into a place, and then the next time they're seen, they're maybe drowned in shallow water several miles away, with no evidence of any fight, no high limits of alcohol or drugs or anything in their body. There's things like that
some with
are
all
beyond
of their blood missing.
explanation.
Some completely drained of their blood. Now, what is that?
Yeah.
That's happened on a lot of accounts.
There are people, that consider themselves vampires that actually drink blood. Mm-hmm. They're sanguists, if you will. It's not a vampire immortal thing, but just a desire to drink human blood. They crave it.
But there could be creatures out there too. There could be aliens. It could be anything. I don't know if all of these cases are tied in together. I mean, they all do have very similar, just the weird stuff with it. The 9/11 stuff is just so strange, and I know that David Pilates, it has to meet a certain criteria, whereas Steph Young will tell stories about all of it, and she'll put the groups that match together, such as the smiley face killers and stuff like that, and the ones that are winding up in the water. But the ones, like you said, the ones that go missing from the bars and things like that, and they were on camera going in and not coming out, that I didn't think about that.
That's more scary to me. If people go missing in the woods.
Yes.
I mean, there's weird things in the woods, strange things in the woods. I've got 2 books full of it.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
there are normal things in the woods that can kill you too. You can walk off of something, you can drown, you can fall, down between some rocks. There are predatory animals out there that will eat you if they get the chance, or if you, fall and die, then something's going to come along and scavenge your corpse anyway. So there are things like that. But when you get somebody disappearing from, a public, well-attended location like that, that's something, even that's a whole new level of creepy right there.
It is a whole new level, yeah. And like I said, too, in the woods, I mean, there's plenty of times we used to go up on Montesano Mountain or go out in the mountains of Tennessee and stuff, and we'd be walking on the trails, and all of a sudden everything would happen like that, that whole feeling. And I'm like, we got to go. We're not going further. We're going back the way we came, and we're out of here. I cannot explain it, but it was just that whole protect your kids thing came through. And it's like, there's something watching us. There's something it was just, and I know you've had it too. I got to go. You're out for camping and you're like, nope, you got to go. And we'll never know. I don't want to know what would have happened, but I don't know if these people had that. Like, I mean, you get the people were on their cell phones when they were taken, and they're like, you hear this heavy breathing or a wind, like almost like they were sucked up into something, and their cell phones found like mile away, crashed into bits. What's that? And the ones that are walking just in front of or just behind, and they go around a corner and they're gone. Did they go through a portal? How do they disappear like that? All these things are possible. I don't know.
There was one where a guy was out front of a place on his cell phone talking to his girlfriend, and she's like literally just down the block. Driving to pick him up. By the time she gets to where he was supposed to be, he's nowhere to be found. And then, like days later, they find the body again in the water. He's drowned, but he's only been there a few hours, yet he's been missing for days.
Yep, and their feet aren't dirty. Or these kids that were, 3 years old, and they're found 20 miles uphill.
Barefoot.
And with nothing on the bottom of their feet, no scars, no dirt, no nothing. So how in the world is this happening? Is it some type of a monster like carrying them away? Is it some kind of invisibility cloak that's being put over them so they could get them out of there so they're not seen? Are they just changing the cameras? What is going on?
Yeah.
So there's monsters.
And to what intent or purpose?
Right.
Would you do that unless you're doing some, just dry runs or experimenting? Maybe they're just testing it out before,
I don't know,
wider use or some more nefarious principle. Let's give it a test run. Let's see if we can kidnap a guy from a bar and take him 2 miles away and throw him in the creek.
Let's just see.
Without being seen.
Right. I mean, it sounds far-fetched, but, you can't have, 2,000 accounts of a situation happening and have a reasonable explanation for all of them. Something's going on. And I don't know what it is. I really don't. The closest thing, like I said, I could come to is that, especially in the cases where they all have a certain DNA, they all have a certain blood type or, something like that. That's not, if it's a portal that they're falling through or going through or a wormhole or whatever you want to say, some kind of thing like that, it's a picky one. That doesn't make any sense. They seem to be chosen. So I don't know. It's not necessarily, it's a monster, but it's a monster. We don't know what it is. We don't see it. We can't really put it into a category other than it's scary as all get out. And it's a mystery. And, we don't know. We don't know. But then there's the ones that we see. You were telling me, I think it was yesterday, you were telling me about the awful. Do you have any of those? Like, what stories of crazy cryptids that you've seen? You told us one about the green eyes. You know about that?
Yeah, that's down in Georgia at the Chickamauga National Battlefield. There's a creature that they've seen in there that's almost described as like a ghost or some kind of wraith that moves through the woods and across the battlefield there. And it has these glowing green eyes, hence they call it old green eyes. And there have been so many eyewitness accounts, and even there was a former park ranger there that had done interviews. He had encounters with it and stuff, and he would say, there's something out there. And a lot of people thought, that maybe it had to do with because of all the dead there. That was one of the bloodiest battles in the Civil War. But the legend goes back that the old Green Eyes was actually even seen during the war floating amongst the bodies after the battle was over. So who knows what that is? I mean, there's a tower there too that's haunted that people have heard things. It's on Snodgrass Hill. I can't think of the name of the tower, but they've heard screams and things coming from it even at night when the park's closed. And it's one of those places like Gettysburg that if you have the ability to feel and to sense stuff, you're going to have it here.
Yeah.
It's encounter. I've been in there. I've seen mist come out of the woods in the daytime, just come up out of nowhere and then disappear just as quickly. I've heard what sound like cannon fire when there's no reenactments, when there's not anything going on. I've heard hoofbeats. It's just one of those places where you can't tell what's real and what's not. But something like that. Okay, there's no horses here, but I heard hoofbeats. So, but it's an interesting place if you ever get to go. It's in Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, just across the Tennessee line there, just after Chattanooga. If you're going down I-75 toward the south.
Yeah, and that's another one too, where you think of, was it there before the battles? Obviously, you said something about there was accounts before, so obviously
Yeah,
it was. Now,
was.
did that cause a lot of that to go? I don't know, but we hear a lot about entities that hang around, a lot of negativity. We hear about land that just pretty much breeds negativity, and things happen there over and over and over again, whether it be massacres for Native Americans or not massacres of mass, people, or just bad things always happen on that land. We've talked about all of that, where Devil's Den and Devil's Hill and Devil's Tower and Devil's this, all of those things. It could be that that's just an elemental of some kind, it's part of the world. And it does feed off of that negativity, whether it causes it or not. But that's just creepy. You showed me a picture of that, and it was just, old Green Eyes. That's pretty hideous. That's pretty hideous.
It has fangs and claws and like it's very pale, but it has like long black hair and then these brilliant green eyes. That's beyond cryptid. That's demonic or something almost, there. You're talking about the awful. The awful was what they called it. It was a winged cryptid. It wasn't humanoid. It was around I think it's Berkshire, Vermont, seen by several people. One of the very first known sightings. It was probably in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Two sawmill workers were on their way home. They crossed over a bridge and they saw this beast glaring down at them. Here's another thing. It's watching them, and then they noticed it watching them, and it was so frightening that one of them immediately had a heart attack. And eyewitnesses described it as looking like similar in appearance to the griffin of medieval lore. It had grayish wings, huge wingspan, long serpentine tail, and claws. And I don't know beyond that how griffin-like it was, because Griffin's supposed to be part lion, I think, but that's the way it described it. And it was, at the time, such a uproar about that H.P. Lovecraft, the famous horror author, traveled there in, I believe it was 1925, to investigate the sightings of the creature, and he used that for inspiration for some of his writings. And if you read about Cthulhu and some of the old ones and things, that's where he got some ideas for stuff like that. So that's kind of neat.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things like that out there once you start delving into it. And I mean, there's some that are recent, some that go back, even to the early 1900s, the 1800s, even the 1700s. There's things that just aren't supposed to be there, that can't be explained, or not only that, but what is it,
Yeah, it is too. It's like the legends. I don't think there's any place that you can live that doesn't have a legend of some type boogeyman kind of thing. Like I said here, Jersey Devil and, so many other different things that go around. But a lot of these, when I was in Alabama and Tennessee, and it just seems like it's not just one sighting. It's multiple sightings, and it usually stretches over decades. And you wonder if it's true, like the Chupacabra, that lasted for quite a long time. Now it's kind of shifted and changed from the little green thing with the spikes on its head and the big goat sucker teeth. in Puerto Rico, and then all of a sudden it's in Florida, and it's all up and through.
Showed up in Mexico and then up into Texas, and now it's in other parts of the West. Heard reports in Arizona, New Mexico, such as you can see almost a migratory pattern there.
Yeah.
If it is a real creature, if it is a real animal, which I believe it is, I think it may just be something that we don't know about, because there are animals that drink other animals' blood. When I was a kid, something was killing my grandmother's chickens, and she would find them dead with two holes in their head, and their blood was gone. And eventually they found out what was doing. I think they set a trap or something. Turned out it was a skunk. I didn't know that a skunk would puncture a chicken's head and drink their blood, but this one was. They killed the skunk and then never had the problem anymore. Wow. But who's to say it's not some animal that we're not aware of? I mean, based on things I've read, there are more species, particularly in somewhere like the Amazon or places that haven't been explored that well. There are more species of birds, insects, animals, and things that we don't know about than those that we do know about. And that's mind-boggling. Think of it. And there's, every year they find a new spider, new birds, new kind of bugs. So who's to say there's not bigger creatures out there that they just, the rainforest, I can see, okay, yeah, that's for snakes and bugs and fish and stuff. But, what about even in the U.S., you've got acres and acres and acres of unexplored territory, like out here where I'm at in Oregon. You get outside of Portland, it's, there's mountains and national forests and things, where there's still places out here where people have rarely been. In some places, maybe never have people been there. So you don't know what's out there. And if it doesn't like people, wants to stay away from people, if it's smart, it'll stay in. That's what I think part of the Bigfoot or Sasquatch legend is. I think it knows to stay away from people. Mm-hmm. Because of what they would do to it. I mean, if they, and I hope they never do. If they caught a live Bigfoot, that would be the saddest thing in the world. They would put it in a cage. They would poke it and prod it and run tests on it and draw blood and poke it with a stick and stuff. I hope if they ever find one that it's the body of one that's deceased by natural causes. That would be good proof for me. But I don't want them to ever get a live one, especially a young one. That would be terrible.
Yeah, it absolutely would. And again, I think that they're more interdimensional. I can't explain that. I mean, maybe it's a Native American side of me and just hearing all the legends and stuff, but I think they're more of a spiritual kind of thing as far as the abilities of it, or supernatural, where it's probably coming in from another dimension just because it's a hunter-gatherer. The water's probably better here, the food. I don't have a clue why, but it just seems like it'd do that. And somebody had asked me, I know I'd heard an older elder say one time, it was like, well, why was the carcass never found? He said, well, I go through the woods all the time, and I know there's bear out there. I've never come across a carcass, and I know that there's this out there, and I've never deer. Yes, this, yes, but so that doesn't necessarily prove that it doesn't exist. However, he looked and he says, well, they just drag them back through to the other dimension. If they have a dead one come here, and why do they, why is there, white ones, in Alaska, and, and all this other, the Yeti, and the abominable snowman and things like that. And he goes, well, camouflage. You're going to wear you're going to wear the camouflage that works best for where you're going. I mean, the military does that, So again, we seem to take away a lot of that, where we're thinking, well, gosh, if you brought it into practical terms, if you were going into a certain situation, you're going to wear the camouflage that works for that. Is that a possibility? I'd have to say it's a possibility. Do I know it? No, I don't know it. I'm not a Bigfoot expert, but I do agree.
But just based on other animals and other creatures and things, they naturally adapt to their area through their mimicry or their natural camouflage or whatever. Why wouldn't, a Bigfoot
right.
or a Yeti?
It's something we forgot about too, and it's like I know it's called Old Shuck, and in different countries, and here it's called basically black dog. A lot of people have seen that, and this is again above and away from Dogman or anything like that. These are black dogs. A lot of times they'll say that it's hounds of hell or a harbinger. of some kind of doom. But in other countries, like I said, it's called old shuck or just shuck. And here it's the black dog. And that's one that sightings have been all over the place. And, usually huge, larger than normal. I mean, if you look at an old Scottish wolfhound, those things are pretty big, but they're not
Right.
scary unless they're coming at you. But these are definitely have that evil air to them. I don't know how much you've heard about them, but I know anytime that anybody brings that up, or there's been a lot of trucker sightings where they see the black dog. I think there was even a movie about it. I think Meatloaf was in that, wasn't he? Black Dog, that old movie. But, when they saw the black dog, something bad was going to happen. You were going to have an accident and something. But that's not quite the same one.
They
It's a
believe
different
like
one.
if you saw it, that it meant you would die within the year or something like that. So if you heard it howl, you were supposed to shut your eyes and not look till it went away.
Right.
But, and plus you're standing there with your eyes closed, you don't know if it's going to eat you because from different stories, the size of a calf or even a horse in some instances, and like I said, when you're out in the woods at night and you come across something, it's going to look bigger, but still, even the size of a calf, that's a big dog. That's more prevalent in England, but there are reports in other countries. But yeah, it goes back in for centuries in England. But then it's in other folklore too, and some of the Nordic stuff and that part of the world.
Yeah. I mean, I know you've heard of some of the crazy mixes out there. Weren't you saying something to me about was it a crocodile part?
It was
What was it? That's crazy.
Coonigator. It was a raccoon with what looked like an alligator's snout, like a scale-covered snout, and then the rest of the thing looks basically like a raccoon with fur and everything.
It sounds funny, but, you come across something like that, that's frightening. It's like, in Monsters 1, I told you that I saw that thing that would look like it was part rabbit, part something, and then part, platypus look.
Yeah. Well, platypus, like a beaver with a duck's beak.
Yeah.
It's a mammal, yet it lays eggs. What? It's like, this is weird.
It was insane looking, in the middle of a road with two cornfields on both sides. And it wasn't very big, but it was frightening to see. So I can imagine if we've got a lot of combinations. We've got like, I think you said something about a bat squatch.
Yeah, it's similar to, and that's in just across the river here over in Washington. That's where they've seen that. It's your typical kind of dark colored Pacific Northwest version of Bigfoot, except this one has grown wings, like bat wings, that it can flit around on, fly around. I think it more glides than actually flies, but and again, is it something that's adapting or evolving? You asked earlier about the Whatsit. That was from Clarion County, Pennsylvania. It's about the size of a sheep and kind of resembles one, except for the head, which looks like a pig, and then the rear end of it looks like a cow. So it's sheep, pig, cow. Kind of reminds me of South Park. They had man, bear, pig. It's what is it? Some kind of weird crossbreed that's anomalous, but has happened in nature, or is it an actual cryptid, or is it just somebody mistakenly seeing something? But again, there's only so much I think that you could mistake. It's like
right. And then we've got all like the little things that, you can't mistake it as far as, is it mythological or is it lore only? We're talking about a lot of sightings and things. There are people who have seen gremlins. There are people who have seen goblins. And we're not just talking about Harry Potter stuff here. We're talking about stuff that had an intent to do harm or evil or trickery. And there are accounts all over about this, and people just don't realize it. But when you start digging, there's people who will tell you, yes, we had them. There was that one account of the lady bringing in her groceries, and she, the kids were helping her bring in the groceries, and she sees it, and all of a sudden this thing moves from one end of the driveway to the other, right in front of her, and then she looks again, and she says, well, what is that? And I think at first she said she thought it was like a lawn gnome, like somebody put a lawn gnome there. And then she looks and now it's gone. Where is it? there's that thing, well, where is it? What's going on? And she said it looked to her, basically, it was like a goblin or a gremlin or something along those lines. And that's pretty frightening. But when something keeps coming up like that, is it a cryptid? Are we just mistaking it and calling it a goblin? Or do goblins or gremlins and things like that really exist? Because there's tribes that'll tell you they do. That's nuts. I mean, whether it's a hobgoblin or, any of that stuff, it's...
And again, even if it is just a folktale or something, where did that come from? I mean, that just, a lot of that stuff, I don't believe it just sprang forth completely formed from somebody's imagination. I think, like the other stuff we talked about, there's at least a nugget of truth in there, if not the whole thing could be true. But there are creatures and things that exist that we don't know about. Are they interdimensional? Or are they just some sort of weird hybrid? Who knows? But it's nice to pursue. I mean, that's been my life's work. I read Frank Edwards' books when I was a kid, and then that led me into Charles Fort. And just, it's like Fort said, one measures a circle beginning anywhere, and that's true. I mean, that's the way the paranormal or Forteana or the cryptids or any of this is. You can pick any part of it you want and head that direction and just run with it, and there's no end to it.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? I mean, I was just pulled something up here because I wanted to look more into the Gremlins, and the old movie Gremlins, and that was a fun movie and stuff like that. But I remember in there was this one guy who believed and knew what they were. The whole thing seems to stay. It's a mythological creature, but the whole thing seems to grew up bigger during the World Wars because they were said to, mess around with aircraft and the mechanisms of transportation and things like that too, and they were blaming it on things like that. But
they believed that there were little creatures that,
absolutely,
and you have that in some of the Nordic folklore too. They have the goblins and the gremlins and the trolls, and then with the military there, you had the gremlins, and then with the Air Force, you had precursor to UFOs in the Foo Fighters. They saw Foo Fighters, back in the 40s before the first modern UFO sightings, in the Roswell and beyond.
Well, I was just thinking, how you had, I'm thinking back in a lot of military stories, especially, in, I believe a couple of them were during Vietnam, and I know some of them were in World War II. And these seem to have stemmed up in a lot of the world wars. What if gremlins, not just just a what if here, weren't just out of mythology, but basically, if you ever believe in that whole aliens are trying to hold us back from destroying ourselves. Because I know that there were things like certain bombs were supposed to go off that didn't. Many accounts of soldiers coming back and saying this. All of a sudden everything just froze, and they didn't mean just locked up. It was covered in ice. It couldn't work, and it was hot out. Things like that, stories like that, like what was going on there. Could it possibly be that aliens from another planet didn't want us to destroy ourselves, so they were trying to hold up? What if gremlins were thrown in to tear apart? I mean, you wonder.
And that was their purpose, to cause havoc and problems and short things out, and just kind of a mischievous with just a hint of evil in there. But that was their thing, to trip man up, to kind of give you a little extra burden.
Yeah, I mean, it's with everything we've talked about in the past couple of days, I mean, it certainly it's not that far-fetched to think something like that.
Right.
You'd think, okay, well, if an alien really wanted to stop us from using the nuclear bomb, why didn't they? Well, you know what? There are plenty of accounts where they, something did. Something wasn't working. Not just, I wish almost that they had, so Hiroshima didn't happen. But there were so many different accounts we're starting to hear now where people will say certain things happened, and there was unexplainable events that happened that stopped this attack or stopped that. So I don't know. I mean, it's not as far-fetched once you start getting into this stuff. Like I said, if you get a million stories, every single one of them but one, then something's going on. But there's just too many stories out there of people seeing these creatures, people having these events happen to them. Even the crazy ones, I can't for the life of me think that a creature, something being born deformed, I find that very I've seen it happen. I've lived on farms.
Mhm.
And then living for whatever reason, maybe it was tossed away or thought dead and, grew up in the woods and became whatever it needed to become to survive. That makes perfect sense to me.
Uh,
But I can't see half raccoon, half alligator.
yeah,
So,
that's
or, bat squatch even, I mean, just because it's called bat squatch doesn't mean that it's half Sasquatch and half bat, but it might look like it's that large and be hairy and have wings and just have a different kind of head. Is it possible? Sure, because anything can be born malformed. Anything can get a hold of something that's going to change it, like toxins or radiation or whatever it could possibly be to change it.
absolutely.
That's, and live, and just be deformed. But to have some of the abilities that I'm hearing that's happening out there, like, I guess the flying ones too, that could be it. But the ones that we're talking about seem to have an intent. And they seem to have, what you want to say, a mission. That in some of them that's true.
Mhm.
Not just coming to scare. A lot of them seems like, human beings have stumbled onto them. Not so much they're coming after humans. Now there's some that do. But I think we're going to start hearing more and more and more. I mean, as we develop, if you think about it, you've got a lot more mountain lions and cougars coming out of the woods because we're taking their territory. They're coming into developments. They're, bears. How many times have you heard, bears in my pool, bears, and, it's all over Facebook. It's all over, they're being pushed out, of their natural habitat. So why not these things? If there are such a thing, but we've got hundreds of stories of things terrorizing, towns, and the town just takes it for granted. That's old awful. That's old, bat squatch or whatever. But nobody seems to be able to ever catch one. And if they do, a lot of the ones that you see online now, they've caught a dog that they think is a chupacabra, but it's basically an old dog that's got malformed in his mange and things like that. And that to me is just so sad.
Yeah.
Because that's just an animal that's gotten out there for whatever reason and adapted and is doing what it's got to do. But as far as monsters, there's some that it doesn't seem likely, but if I had to toss a coin, I would say that there's a good chance that some of these things exist, and I don't necessarily think that they're all from this earth. I really think that there's a lot of extra dimensionals coming through. I do.
A lot of it, to me, the fun is in the chase and in the study and in hearing the stories. I don't have to have proof. I love hearing the stories. I've talked to witnesses who were so insistent and so fervent that whatever they saw, they believe what they saw. They believe what they're telling you. They're not making it up. They're not seeking attention. In fact, a lot of people that I've talked with are even reticent to even talk about it in the first place. You got to kind of coax it out of them.
Right.
And it's just...
And it's scary, and they're still scared. I mean, look at us telling the stories that we have. I mean, we're just two people. We're not even people that we would say were Bigfoot hunters or, we're out there looking for this stuff. This is just stuff that we've stumbled on.
A lot of the stuff, especially, in my early years, was, like I said, stuff I'd stumbled on. I didn't actually start actively seeking it out until probably sometime around 82, 83, somewhere in there. So a good 30 some odd years anyway. But the initial start into it was just, what's this? My first ghost sighting when I was a kid, just like, that's not supposed to happen. What caused that? What was that? What did I just see? And it just opened up a curiosity in me that I've never been able to satisfy, and I don't think I will ever be able to satisfy. But the joy comes from the pursuit, from hearing the stories, from sharing the stories, from talking to somebody and hearing them describe things and see that excitement and sometimes still that fear or fright that I've experienced myself, like, my encounter with the black-eyed kids or the thing in the woods or the Beast of Swanson Lane or whatever. And it's just, I know what I saw and nobody's ever going to convince me different.
Right. And I'm right there with you, because even if you were kids, doesn't mean it wasn't true and we imagined it. Because I can remember we were talking the other night. You asked me if I had been abducted and stuff, and I'm like, well, how, a lot of times, how would you know? First of all, do I think that everybody who says they were abducted have been? No, but I think some of them. There's too much out there. And if we are we really seeing what they look like? Because if they have the power to do, there was a story about a couple that had been abducted in a desert, and I forget their names, but it's been recent, and the aliens that had them, for whatever reason, it seemed like they were there to mine something out of the ground, and they just happened to be there camping, and they were just kind of like holding them back while they did what they had to do.
Wrong place, wrong time,
right.
kind of thing.
They weren't taken up in a ship and the normal thing that you hear about. But what happened to them is they were so scared. The woman said that she kept looking at this one, and they were acting so matter-of-factly, very much like we would, like we had said before, like take a dolphin out and tag it and do all this kind of stuff. They weren't doing anything medically on them, but they were positioning them and putting them in a certain place, like they wanted them out of the way, and they were just doing it methodically, and they were just like holding them in one place. And I think it was in the back of their camper, and they were just like guarding them. And the whole time this woman locks eyes with this one, and she's getting the telepathic stuff, like, just be calm, we're not going to hurt you, blah, 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 like this. And the woman was just like so erratic that she said at one point in time, she looked over to the side. It almost told her, look out the window, you're okay. And in the window, she sees this angel appear.
Wow.
Like your typical thing that you would think an angel looked like, with the flowing robes and the wings and the glow and the all white and that kind of thing, and the warm feeling. She said when she looked at this angel, she just felt so calm, and she calmed right down. And then eventually, I guess the aliens or whatever knocked them out, just with a thought or whatever. I don't know what they did to knock him out. But that made me think, okay, was there really an angel there? Was it just, it showed her a hologram of something?
Yeah, almost like it read her mind to see, okay, this is what would calm you down.
Right.
I'm going to make a projection of it, and then you're going to see it, and it'll work. That's
right. So
interesting to think about.
Yeah, so that makes me think, so, what are we really seeing? If something has the ability to, I guess what I'm trying to say is, if something has the ability to put in our minds what we're seeing, because we know spirits can do that. We know ghosts can do that. We've both seen that. We've both seen
And the government
absolutely
allegedly can do it. Look up Project Bluebeam.
Absolutely.
It's the same thing, where they're able to project a convincing hologram of anything, basically, and if you seeing is believing, there you go.
Exactly. So in all of this, I like I said, I wonder, like, why would something, if it does have the ability to choose, if it's coming over here, why would it choose to look like a crocodile raccoon thing? Why would it be a little more sleek? We don't know. And what we're seeing, too, might not be exactly what it perceives, because I know you'd said that again with whatever that thing is that from the 50s, who looked like a almost like an alien with big red eyes and the big cone-shaped thing behind his head. But you said that maybe they just caught that thing, and that's what it said. Okay, I'll look like this, because honestly, that's not quite what a shapeshifter is. A shapeshifter picks a shape, it does that to go do its thing. It usually picks something like, like I said, it looks like a dog man, but it can be other things too. It could be a bird. It could be, whatever, depending on its level of power. Okay. We know that in, places like, oh gosh, what's the name of that place? Skinwalker Ranch and stuff. There's been portals. There's guys stood there and watched an orange portal open up, and a bear dog looking thing basically squeeze its way out, came out of that thing, landed right there, like it owned the place and walked right on like it didn't even see them. And then other times they've had things like that showing up, and the dogs got crazy and ran after it, and it just, not the same thing, but another being or whatever it was, just basically poof, and the dogs just burst into flames and burnt right there. So
holy cow.
I know, right? And this is all in, in the books, and it's all in the, the interviews and everything else. So what in the world are we dealing with out there? There's obviously more things walking around. Like we said, there's more things in heaven and earth than dreamt of in our philosophies. So if some of these monsters are seeping through and people are getting ideas to make movies of them, not everything is just coming out of their mind. Some of it is based in some seed of truth, whether it be like the Frankenstein, with the reanimation of the dead, or zombies doing what they do, what they did, or whether it's crazy to think about, but we really don't know what's out there. We don't know what's capable, whether it be the military or whether it be extra dimensionals or aliens or what's right here in our own backyard. We think we know, but we don't. Anything is possible. There's too many sightings of all these different things. And, some of these things that we're treating as monsters might not really be monsters at all. But before I let you go, there's another one that really got you when you were a kid. And I don't think you've told it on my show before. So I'd love to hear that, because it had a really good ending. Like years later, you came through and it told you found out something about it. I think that's a great story.
One you're talking about.
Yeah.
I've got so many I have to think sometimes.
I know.
Yeah, that one was house I grew up in, where I lived until I was 15 years old. There was a ditch between our property and the property next door. Found out years later that had been the original dirt road through the area, going as far back as the Revolutionary War. But at the time, it was just a ditch. Played it a lot in what I'll call the near end, which was like, nearest the house, and we had a 200 and some foot driveway. So that part of the ditch, that was good for war games. There was places where there were rocks and trees, so you could climb rocks or make a rope swing and try to swing across the ditch. I had a pine needle slide. It was a lot of fun to play in the woods. And but the upper part of the ditch, it came to a point there where that ended, and it actually crossed under the road through a culvert. But just a few yards back from that or so, there was an area where they had my parents had some animal pens up there. They had kept pigs up there. And then at one time, my brother had kept hunting dogs in there. Like when they'd come in to eat and stuff, he would pin them up so they wouldn't breed. And all that was basically rusted and abandoned, messing around up there in that part of the ditch one day. And I had just walked up to the edge of the ditch, and it was deeper up on that part of it. I looked over the edge down into the ditch, just, thinking, that's, probably 8, 10, 12 feet to the ground, depending on where you went off, and then just turned around and started to walk away. Well, I had got maybe, I don't know, a few yards, few steps away, when I heard some kind of commotion in the leaves, something kicking the leaves up. And I turned around and looked where I had just stood, looking over into the ditch, and something came up over the lip of the ditch. But the thing was, it wasn't visible. I could see the disturbance around it, the trees, the small trees and stuff there, the limbs were moving, the leaves were moving, like, say, something, instead of picking its feet up and walking, it was kind of shuffling and sliding its feet through the leaves. That's kind of the way it was kicking up. And of course, it frightened the life out of me. I was probably 8, 9 years old at the time, and I ran screaming down the hill, because it was, at that point, I took off, and it was still coming after me. I could hear it behind me. And I ran. My mom heard me coming, came out on the back porch and was waiting on me when I emerged out of the woods there. And I'm screaming, I'm crying, I can't talk. So, what on earth, what's going on? And I, it took me a while to calm down. She got me a glass of water and this, that, and the other. And then finally I told her, this is what I saw. Well, in the meantime, my dad had gotten home from work. And my brother, who lived about 2.5 miles away, had stopped at our house with my dad before going on to his own house. And my mom told him, because I was scared. I went home, went to bed. I didn't want to have anything to do. But they went up there, looked around. They could see, where things had been disturbed, where there were broken branches, where the leaves had been messed around. But there was no evidence of anything. Nothing came out of the ditch. And after them, and that was the strange thing, they could see like where it started at the top of the ditch, but there was no evidence down in the ditch. Flash forward probably about, and I'm needless to say, I didn't play in that part of the ditch anymore, but needless to say, it was about, I think I was 8 or 9 when that happened. I went back up there when I was not too long before we moved from there. We moved from there when I was 15, so I was probably 13 or 14. I was just out messing around in the woods one day. We had almost 30 acres there that I had to prowl around on, and I had worked my way around and came back up on the ditch. I'm a lot older now. I'm a bigger kid and not scared of much, and I would start thinking, I wonder what that was that scared me when I was a kid. So I walked back up there, still got the old rusting pins and stuff just rusting into the ground. And almost exactly the same thing. I walked up to the edge of the ditch and peered down in there, didn't see anything, turned around to walk away. Sure enough, something came up out of the ditch and chased me back down the other. I didn't scream or cry this time, but I ran like my head was on fire. And that time I went, there was a neighbor kid who was about the same age as me. I went and got him. We went back up there a little, short time afterwards. And again, we could see where the leaves had been disturbed. We could see broken branches and bent weeds and things. Nothing there. And it didn't bother us. I mean, he actually went down in the ditch and walked around. I stood on top. We even did a thing where he went a little farther down the hill and hid behind a tree, and I stood, like bait on the edge of the ditch. Nothing. We switched places. I hid behind the tree. He stood on the edge of the ditch. Nothing. Well, the next year or so, we moved from there, and I'd kind of forgotten about it. Again, flash forward. This time I'm probably 19, 20 years old. I was working in West Knoxville over in Cedar Bluff. I got off work one night, and some people that I worked with they knew somebody that was having a party nearby, so I went to somebody's apartment. I don't even know who the person was. And like I said, it was a person that I worked with that I didn't really know that well, but that was the only person that I knew at the party. And I had never told them the story. Well, there was some girls started playing with a Ouija board. Somebody found one under a couch, and so they get it out, and they get it going. They're going around the room. They want everybody to ask it a question. So I thought, okay, I've got one for you. I said, what scared me when I was a kid? And that's all the information I gave them. I mean, that's so ambiguous. It could be anything.
Right.
Well, the Ouija board spells out, and I still can see this in my head, WATERSPRITE, water sprite.
Wow.
And I'm like, what's that? And the girls are like, we don't know. And they go on to somebody else, So the next day, now this was a long time before the internet. The next day I went to the library and went to the reference library, and she helped me, looked up a water sprite. I think the actual folklore or mythological name for it is a dryad. And it is a creature, an elemental, that's its job. It hides in the woods, and it drives people away from things, particularly in a lot of instances where there was a treasure or something that wasn't supposed to be messed with, and they're often found near water. Well, that was the other thing. Our property had 7 different springs on it that all fed into one and then ran down about 400 yards or so into the lake. So there's, the water. There was also a story in the same area about a buried treasure that back in the 1800s, 2 men had gotten off the train and had I don't know, it was a strong box or a trunk or something with them. And the next day, the men were gone, and they found evidence where the trunk had been dragged off into the woods, and don't know what became of it. Well, supposedly it was buried somewhere. It had some kind of stolen property, probably gold or something, considering the time that it happened. And part of the legend was it was on or near those springs where I live. So there you go. There's the whole story. There was
Wow.
water. There was a special place. There had been battles there. We had an old tree one time that had fallen. We burned the tree and found part of a Civil War bayonet broken off deep in the tree.
Mm.
And I think what happened, people traveling that old dirt road would stop there at those springs for water.
Right.
And unfortunately, they probably got ambushed in both the Revolutionary War or by Indians that are Native Americans. That area was a lot of Cherokee in that area. And then in the Civil War, again, what better place? Because everything was down kind of in a little valley there, and up where the road was, you could see right down onto the springs. And there were huge rock formations and things. There were plenty of places to hide. So there you go. It had a strange history, tale of buried treasure, and running water, which 7 springs, that's kind of unusual in nature to have that many separate springs that close together.
Right. And it wouldn't be the first time that we heard of an elemental basically guarding its ground for, way before there was ever a civil war there, way before. I mean, some of these things are ancient, and we really don't understand that much about it. You sit around with any tribal nation, I don't care if it's in Peru or a village in Africa or a Native American, in the, around here, you're going to hear stories like that. You're going to hear houses to this day. We've had 2 this week that I know of that are active right now that they have been told, you've got elemental, you've got ancients here, and you've got to get the Native American community, you got to get a shaman, you got to get, something like that to help you with it. So why not? That you got chased by a water sprite in the leafy ditch when you were a kid. I mean,
those girls had no way of knowing any of that stuff. I mean, they were just teenagers.
It's pretty amazing.
And water sprite, I didn't even know what it was till I went to the library and
looked it up.
It had a picture on it. Looked like your typical, almost like a fairy type creature. I think it had wings and stuff and this long flowing stuff about it, but it didn't look real happy either. So I was probably better off that I couldn't see what it really looked like.
Well, you're not the only one. I mean, I've heard multiple stories about that. And, one day we're going to get Barry Fitzgerald on here because, man, he's done some amazing work with lore in, in and around where he's from. You can probably, people remember that name from the old Ghost Adventures in International. But I always knew that, even just seeing him on that show, always knew that he had a little bit more knowledge to him about lore and things in his area, He's from, in Ireland and around there. So know that there's just so much, lore. But he tells a story of going out. One of the scariest things that he's ever had happen, going out to this lake. And there's a water sprite there that supposedly pulls people under and drowns them. And it almost got him. It almost got him one day. And we'll have to get him on to talk about that. But as we wrap up our monsters, of course, it won't be the last time we talk about monsters because there's just so many out there and so many cryptids. There's just so many.
Oh, but, absolutely.
We're going to, I think, end this one with something that just kind of predicts the end. It has been all through multiple customs and lore in multiple countries, and most of the time seen the same, sometimes in white, not always in black, but it has been the subject of a Blue Oyster Cult song. It has been heard to escort the freshly dead across the river Styx. It has been seen multiple times in many households as, I still think it's probably a ghost manifesting itself as this image, but the Grim Reaper. Now, everybody's scared of the Grim Reaper. It's usually seen very tall in a long cloak, hooded cloak, most of the time without a face, usually carrying a long sickle. And like we said in the Greek mythology, usually that sickle was used to cut the final cord of your earthly body and, your soul from your earthly body so it could continue on, which I find that's just very interesting, because when you start looking into all the things, all the different cultures, they seem to come together in some way. You have some kind of, soul separating the body, whether it be cord cutting or whatever, but that's what the sickle is all about. But I know, odd, huh? But it always such an ominous figure when you think about it. Nobody wants to see the Grim Reaper. And there's been multiple accounts of people seeing them in hospitals. I've known many orderlies and nurses and, people that work in hospitals. I've been in several myself, where you can almost walk by a room and there'll be this black flowy figure hovering over a person. I think it's funny that you don't hear a lot about people seeing that in a near-death experience in an NDE. That's an interesting concept to think about, but it seems like a lot of is seen when death is hovering. So I don't know. I think you have a story about a Grim Reaper, don't you?
Yeah, it's kind of a creepy one.
Okay. Well, great way to end our monsters too. So bring on the Grim.
The area where I lived, where all these other stories I was telling about happening, there's a family lived up the street, actually, in a house that my parents had lived in before we had the house that I grew up in built. And one night, I think she was the oldest daughter. They had several kids. And she had a dream. And in this dream, the Grim Reaper came to her and told her, said, it's time for you to go. You have to come with me.
Oh, no.
And she said, but no, I'm young. I'm a teenager. I've got all my life ahead of me. Take somebody else. And the Grim Reaper said, okay, who would you like me to take? And she said, well, you can take my grandpa. He's old. He's had a good life. And said the Grim Reaper just kind of faded out in the dream. Well, the next morning, she wakes up and her mom comes in and tells her that her grandfather had passed away during the night. And she, literally suffered over that for a year. She went to therapy over that because she thought she killed her grandfather.
Oh, my.
And she even got to the point, she said, well, maybe it wasn't a dream. Maybe it really happened. But, she couldn't justify it. She's like, if I had it to do over again, I would have just went with him. But again,
can you imagine?
It was a dream. Who knows? But can you? And she was probably 13 or 14 or something at the time it happened. But can you imagine growing up, being that age, impressionable teenage years, thinking that your grandpa died because of you? And she loved her grandpa.
Right. Wow, that's creepy.
Isn't that a creepy story?
It is a creepy story, but we've had many a time where people have dreams and things that come true. Who are we to say, that it one way or the other? That's a pretty vivid dream. Wow. I just don't even know what to say about that.
But if you ever think about that, if you had a dream and the Reaper came to you and was going to take you and you said, no, I don't want to go, who would you pick? And you don't have to answer. That's just food for thought.
Right.
But if you had to pick somebody to send with a Reaper, who would you pick?
That reminds me a little bit about the old Chinaman button, the Chinaman box, the button, that old story. I'll give you a box that has a button, and if you hit the button, you can have $1 million, whatever it is. It's kind of like the genie and the djinn and all that, that's a whole other show, the djinn. But would you hit the button, and you kill somebody else you don't know about? No, I wouldn't. You know what I mean? My son, every once in a while, my son will just creep up and ask me that because, there's been he's been watch a lot of Netflix. I think there's a movie and then there's, a lot of mystery stories on it. And I'm like, no, because I couldn't live with that. So I can't imagine what that girl went through, real or imagined. She thought it was real, and that coincidence is just too crazy. So that's it. You never know when something like that is going to pop into your life. You didn't expect that Sprite. I didn't expect the pig thing and the snot hag and all the things that happened to me, and there's a lot of people out there that these things are happening to. And so definitely something is going on. So I hope we've done some some glory for the monsters in these past couple shows, but I don't even think we scratched the surface.
Oh, we've had some laughs. We've had some chills. It's just...
I know. I'm really creeped out now, though.
People don't know, but this is the kind of stuff we talk when it's just us talking together.
Right.
You're getting eavesdrop on our conversation now. And
yeah, exactly. And as warned, there was talking. I just never understand why people go, well, they're talking so much. It's a talk show. It's a discussion. It's a conversation. Get over it. And if that doesn't suit it, it's my podcast and we do it the way we want.
If we didn't talk, what would we do? Just sit here and quietly meditate?
I don't understand.
I think that'd be a boring podcast.
Oh, people can be so fun. You just wonder what's going through their mind when they say some of the things they say. It's kind of crazy. But anyway, we have fun. And if, people get out there and they want to hear this and they heard something tonight that they didn't think about and it puts a seed of thought in their mind, hey, that's fantastic, because there's whatever you want to call them, whether it's the tiny little microorganism up to, a great big bat squatch. You never know when it's going to come knocking on your door or creeping under your bed or coming out of your closet or chasing you in a ditch, because there's just too many things out there. There's definitely something out there. So chances are you're going to meet something in your lifetime. So beware, because there are things that go bump in the night. Don't they, Steve?
Oh, absolutely. We wouldn't have it any other way.
Tell us where to find your books and how to get a hold of you, my friend.
I'm on Amazon, Kindle exclusively now. Have some paperback versions coming out hopefully soon. Strange Things in the Woods, More Strange Things in the Woods, which are stories that I've collected, and then My Strange World, which is a book of my own personal stories. And find me on Facebook, and my email is published at the end of all my books. I love to hear from my fans. I love to hear people's stories that are similar to mine or even widely different. I've had some amazing emails. So
yes, absolutely. And if you have had an encounter with the uncanny, or you've seen your own monster or cryptid, or you've heard some, great accounts of them, please let us know. Steve is a gatekeeper on our Journey Through the Gate Paranormal Portal podcast Gatekeepers page on Facebook. You can find us both there. Tell us your story. We'd love to hear it, because we're going to put it all together with these and tell some listener stories and stuff, or we can talk to you about it, and maybe we might know somebody who's had an encounter kind of similar to yours, and you can compare stories. So that's what it's all about, discussion and, trying to get all of, collecting data from all directions. That's, what's kept me and Steve going for a long time. So do that. We love to hear from people. And thank you, my friend. This has been awesome. It's another great monster night.
Love it. Look forward to the next one, because I know there'll be more.
There'll be more. And you have a good night. And I hope you don't see any monsters tonight.
Yeah, you too, Cisco. Thanks for having me on.
I love you, my brother. Have a good one.
Love you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you to all you listeners who sat through Monsters 1 and Monsters Part 2. We appreciate each and every single one of you. And again, please, if you have any stories, please send it to journeythroughthegate@gmail.com, or come on over to our Facebook page and get in on the discussion. We'd love to have you. But most importantly, especially after all these monsters, keep your feet under the covers. Keep that closet door shut, because there are things that go bump in the night.